Ladies and gentlemen, dear Seaweed friends, welcome to the Oceanographic Museum of Monaco for this event, which is very much orientated to the blue economy. The title of this session is Seaweed, Reality versus Hype, where we talk about the realities of the companies that have moved up from startup to scale-up across the industry. My name is Samantha Dean. I am the Managing Director of the Kelp Forest Foundation, and we have co-organized this event with the Oceanographic Institute, Prince Albert I of Monaco. This is not intended to be so much a set of presentations, but more a dialogue. So we welcome dynamic questioning from the audience. The session will run from about now till 12 o'clock. And it won't have a coffee break. The session is being filmed and live streamed, and the recording will be hosted on the website of the Oceanographic Museum. I would like to say a special thanks to Robert Calcagno, CEO of the Oceanographic Institute, and the organizing team of the Monaco Ocean Week for allowing, yet again, a seaweed session to take place in this wonderful space. So without further ado, I would like to welcome, for the welcome remarks, first, Mr. Robert Calcagno, CEO of the Oceanographic Institute, Prince Albert I of Monaco, followed by Professor Tim Flannery, who is the Chief Counselor of the Australian Climate Council. Tim served as the Australian Climate Commissioner from 2011 to 2013 and has long been interested in drawdown. It was in this context that he started investigating the potential of seaweed to mitigate climate change.
Thank you very much, Samantha. Dear Adrien, ladies and gentlemen, and dear friends, I'm not going to have a long list of welcome. I thank you all for being here this morning. And I am very honored to say a few words of welcome as I stand here next to my dear friend, Professor Tim Flannery. Tim is an old Australian friend and a seaweed complice, if I can say. Tim is also one of the three great individuals in conversation with his Serene Highness, Prince Albert II, in his latest book, L'Homme et l'Océan, The Ocean and Us. Thank you for your participation, Tim. And I would like, of course, to thank Samantha Dean and through her, the Kelp Forest Foundation, which has organized this morning events, and with the help of our friend Adrien Vincent. I hope that your hand is better now. Furthermore, I thank Caroline Slutweg, I did not see her, Caroline as the event's moderator, and the distinguished participants who will be speaking in a few moments. And please allow me to cite them. Kerstin Schmeideck from Nestlé Purina Care. Thank you, Kerstin. Daniel Huff from Kelp Blue. Olafur Gregersen. Where is Olafur? Oh, yeah. Olafur Gregersen from Ocean Rainforest. Brian Tsuyoshi Takeda from Urkinomics. Rodrigo Garcia Gonzalez from NOTPLA. Vincent Dumézel from UN Global Compact. Dr. Philippe Rotin from the Station Biologique de Roscoff, and of course, our friend Adrien Vincent. Now I must say from Albatross Advisory, is that correct? It changed. Last year it was not that bad. Finally, I am also very happy with the presence here this morning of entrepreneurs whose work we support. As you may know, seaweed are a topic which interests me particularly, and I almost feel like a seaweed ambassador. The development of the seaweed sector is accelerating and scaling up with new outlets on the market and new investment opportunities, maybe progressively new debt, new insurance opportunities. Adrien Vincent was telling me that innovation in the field of seaweed are attracting more and more funding, thus furthering their sustainable production. In 2022, there were over 40 investments in startups specializing in seaweed worldwide, twice as many as in 2020. And political decision makers are also playing their part in supporting the industry. Last November, the European Commissioner for the Environment, Ocean and Fisheries, my friend Virginijus Sinkevicius, announced an ambitious initiative by the EU to encourage seaweed, consisting of 23 political measures aiming to stimulate the seaweed industry in Europe. As for the Oceanographic Institute, it is completely committed to this program. From the first edition in 2021, we decided to accompany Adrien Vincent and the Kelp Forest in organizing this event as part of the Monaco Ocean Week. The event was therefore repeated in March 2022, here welcoming some of the leading players in the fields, entrepreneurs and scientists, as well as representatives of Seaweed for Europe and Save Seaweed Coalition, together with representatives of several NGOs. So, here we are about to launch the 2023 edition, during which we shall be able to appreciate the enormous growth of startups into fast expanding companies. Later on this year, and date are precisely from the 5th to the 7th of October 2023, we will host a major 3-day event at the Maison de l'Océan in Paris, our sister building, owned by the Oceanographic Institute, devoted to the development of the seaweed sector in Europe. This time, this event is initiated by the European Commission, and Adrien Vincent, I think, will tell you more about this later this morning. I hope also that we will be able to transform this yearly conference, it's the third time, into an active, ongoing platform, where we will be able to exchange every day, every week, every month. And last, but certainly not least, I would like to reiterate an announcement made on Tuesday this week. Monaco, Prince Albert II Foundation, Monaco Asset Management, and also the Oceanographic Institute has pledged to create a 100 million euro investment fund to support early, at the same time proven innovation in the blue economy. What I mean by that is Series A and B investment. Investment tickets will be around 5 million euro with a 20% equity target. And qualified and interested companies should contact me if they want to be in touch with this fund. So don't hesitate. That's not for startups, but growing up and proven company. I wish you all a pleasant and successful day, and thank you very much again for being here. Tim, if you want to join us.
Well, thank you so much, Samantha and Robert, for those great opening remarks. This being here today is a bit of a dream for me, as Robert Calcagno knows. I've been trying for a long time to bring together a sort of a critical mass of people interested in the seaweed industry from right across all of the sectors. And the reason I was so interested in doing that is because I think out of meetings like this, we gain the forward momentum to overcome many of the problems that we face. And to hear, Robert, that this event will be turned into an ongoing platform is hugely encouraging. I think it's wonderful to see. You know, our industry, the seaweed industry, is centuries old. It's very, very old in some regards, particularly in Asia. But it's also one that is changing rapidly as technology develops and as the requirements of our global civilization change as well. And the diversity of enterprises within our sector are simply enormous. And that diversity is driven by the genetic diversity of the organisms that the industry is based on. I just want to pull out a few examples, really, of sectors based on that diversity, which give a little flavour of how diverse our sector is. In the brown seaweeds, we have now kelp cultivation at scale for use in feedstocks, biostimulants in soil and so forth. Within the red seaweeds, we have now the commercial development of Asparagopsis for use in methane abatement. In the green seaweeds, we have the use of ulva for water purification on a substantial scale in parts of the world. So those three just give you a tiny little concept of how diverse the whole sector is. And of course, we are now seeing major breakthroughs just as a matter of routine. It's incredible. If I look back 5 years about the challenges we had in just closing the life cycle of some of the seaweeds, they seemed insurmountable, yet today they are done for the red seaweeds, the brown and the greens. And that is a huge step forward for industry to have closed that life cycle. We are understanding the importance of biodiversity in seaweed ecosystems, seaweed-dominated ecosystems. We've got a long way to go, but we are beginning now to explore that and its importance. And we are developing very rapidly pathways to commercialisation for seaweed products right across the sector. So all of that is good. That's where I think the reality exceeds the hype, if we want to go back to our initial premise for today's meeting. And I guess what that also means is that individual seaweed enterprises are moving forward very, very quickly. But the seaweed industry needs to do more than that. The reason that I became interested in the seaweed sector is that it offers one of just a few potential pathways for drawing down carbon at scale. As we've moved forward, we've seen that, in fact, the carbon part of the equation isn't always a critical part of the economy of developing a seaweed business. So maybe, or it may not be. But what we do know is that for the globe as a whole, developing drawdown potential is just hugely important. We know we cannot achieve any of the pathways to 1.5 and many of the pathways to 2 degrees C without very substantial drawdown. And so far, our human efforts have been quite rightly focused on emissions reduction, from fossil fuel industries and from elsewhere. That has come at the cost of really neglecting the development of some of those potential drawdown pathways. If you look at the scale of the problem, it is really quite formidable. Just to give you an example, if we wish to reduce CO2 concentrations in the atmosphere by 1 part per million, so we're currently at 418 parts per million, we need to get down to 350 or thereabouts. 1 part per million drawdown is the equivalent of taking about 18 gigatons of CO2 out of the atmosphere. And to do that, if you want to do 1 gigaton, and these are very, very rough figures, you need a seaweed farm of 1 million square kilometres. Yeah? So these are very large-scale challenges, right? And yet we know they're indispensable. We simply cannot stay down below 1.5 or even 2 without them. And I spent the last decade I was a judge on the Virgin Earth Challenge. I've looked into every form of drawdown you can imagine. We had 10,000 entries into the Virgin Earth Challenge. I went through them all and decided there was really only 3 or 4 potential pathways that are scalable. One concerns silicate rocks, still poorly explored, and of course to dig up rocks we need to burn fossil fuels at the moment, so that one is perhaps for the future. There is direct air capture. The problems of scalability with direct air capture are simply enormous. There's reforestation, which is currently doing something. A paper published a month or so ago showed that we were drawing down about 2 gigatons a year through treating our forests better. So that's something. And then there's seaweed. And seaweed is the area that we are here for today, and which I really truly believe offers the greatest potential right now for drawing CO2 out of the atmosphere at some sort of scale. We know from the work that's been done on drawdown, that currently, as I said, we're drawing down about 2 gigatons a year. We need to increase that to roughly 3 gigatons a year, at least over the next few years, to stay on track for meeting those targets of between 1.5 and 2 degrees. There is an enormous knowledge deficit in this area. We know how to grow seaweed, we know how to some extent to commercialise it and use its various products. What we don't yet fully understand is how much carbon we can sequester for how long, where in our oceans. And I do believe that this needs to be a focus of our research as we go into the future. It would be a tragedy for the planet if we developed successful seaweed industries without capturing that carbon. Because without capturing the carbon, we know we face a very dire future of destabilisation for our whole civilization if we allow those temperatures to simply continue to increase. So that science is a pressing need, and I hope today, through this meeting, we will at least acknowledge that reality, that need. We must be careful as we do that we don't let the perfect become the enemy of the good. We know that the oceans are very different from the land-based sinks in terms of the way they operate. We know the science, the monitoring, and so forth will be different. But we must be very careful as we go forward that we're not putting unnecessary barriers before the seaweed industry as it develops in terms of carbon sequestration. All other things being equal, so acknowledging the different science and so forth of the oceans versus the land, we need to make sure we're not putting barriers in front of ocean sequestration that we're not putting in front of land-based sequestration. Yeah? This is a grand experiment on land and in the oceans. We still have so very much to learn. The pathways are complex, and of course they're interlaced. If you use seaweed as a biostimulant in soils, we have a sequestration on land from the ocean-based product. So I just appeal to you all today to come into this meeting with goodwill and a sense of collaboration, a sense that the problems that we face are so large that unless we in this room can make progress, then we will not make progress in terms of stabilising our climate. Thank you very much. I look forward to hearing everything that's said today. It's going to be a wonderful occasion. And thank you, Robert, for being so proactive in making all of this happen. Thank you.
Thank you, Tim, and welcome everybody for making the trip to the Oceanographic Institute. I have just found out we have 172 people following us online on the live stream. So fantastic. So welcome everyone who's also joining us online. My name is Caroline Slootweg. I am the co-founder of Kelp Blue. You will not be hearing a lot from me today. I will be introducing the speakers because they're the ones that have everything to say. But what I will say is every session is from someone who has made enormous strides this past year in their respective industries, in their respective spaces when it comes to seaweed. So without further ado, what we're going to be hearing in our first session is from two ocean entrepreneurs who have really started to step up and really make a change. The first one is Daniel Hoofd, CEO of Kelp Blue, and the second is Oliver Gregerson, CEO and founder of Ocean Rainforest. So I will give the floor now to Daniel.
Thank you. It's also a dream for me to be here, but that has more to do with Jean-Jacques Cousteau and the little yellow submarine outside, which when I was small was what I wanted to drive. So maybe that's coming soon. So thanks, great honor to be here, and I'd like to talk about a number of things today. Around, what is this thing that the seaweed industry is promising in terms of environmental impact, in terms of financial returns, in terms of social impact. So what's the reality of that? Where are we really? And I'll just talk about what we're doing. And unfortunately, of course, with the limited amount of time, we don't have enough of Asia represented, and we perhaps underrepresent today the red seaweed industry. It's really quite brown seaweed focused. Are we investable yet? So I think this is very important. the moment that we become something that is quotidian to invest in, I think is very seminal and changes everything in terms of the pull and the ease it gives to new starters in this industry. And what does that mean? You know, does it mean just profitable? Does it mean quantifiable impact? Does it mean that quantifiable impact needs to be perfect, a bit what Tim was talking about, or is good good enough, since we're going to be learning over the next decades? Does it mean that we're able to raise debt? Does it mean all of those things? And what are the views of the market? And I guess Kirsten will give a bit of an insight into that as well. So, and of course to showcase some of our other Oceans Champions achievements. So a quick introduction to myself. I didn't start with the Jedis. I started very much with the dark side, with Shell. So I'm Dutch. When I was born, we moved to Dubai and then to Canada. So you're perhaps confused about where my accent comes from. So am I. For Shell, I moved really all over the world, so lived in many, many different places, and also had roles in which I was traveling pretty much everywhere. And then at some point, my wife and her best friend in Brisbane went to see a lecture by Tim Flannery, which was, of course, about seaweed and drawdown. And they came home rather late, because they'd stayed up for a glass of wine, and were inspired, but also a bit skeptical about this scientist who wanted to plant seaweed in all the world's oceans, but had no idea how to fund this. And so because they were late and the food was cold, I was defending Tim Flannery quite strongly. And then we thought maybe we should do some fact-checking. We started with his book, and then I read up on as many papers as I could get my hands on, really more out of an interest for these seaweed forests that I'd never heard of. I grew up swimming and snorkeling a lot in the Mediterranean, but never in these temperate rainforests. And suddenly the penny dropped that here is an industry that is still in many ways in the Middle Ages, where there's a market that is clear but never gets enough supply and never gets enough consistency to work, and that perhaps my training in the oil and gas industry in a lot of different complex places, running big complex projects, was perfect for this. It also felt much more like the future than working with the dark side. So I became one with the force and quit and set up Kelp Blue in the beginning of 2020, went to Namibia, was about to get started, and then lockdowns hit. So, So this is where I live now as a result. Thank you, Tim. It's one of the most beautiful places in the world. Very hostile, but absolutely gorgeous. This is the coast of Namibia, just 5 minutes from our house, where I live with Lucy and our 4 children. And Lucy is there doing many things, also setting up a school. These are the 3 kids. You'll note they're reading the same book. This is not a school book. This is what my wife does. And so a book plug. My wife writes spy thrillers, which are semi-autobiographical about the places that we lived in. And I hear book 4 will be about seaweed. So it's not just a book plug, but you can buy these on Amazon, and I recommend it. They're very good. Okay, back to the oceans. So what does Kelp Blue do? We cultivate kelp offshore, and we cultivate giant kelp. So see this more as a forest, and you're trimming the top of it. So we harvest the canopy. This is a picture of a vessel built in 1916 in California. And what happened then is that the First World War obviously required a lot of gunpowder, smokeless cordite, and that was made with potassium. And all the potassium in the world came from German salt mines. So the Allies had a major problem. And they commissioned these vessels. The Hercules Powder Company won the tender for the Royal Navy to trim the wild kelp forests in California and convert with enzymatic extraction that seaweed into potassium, which was then used for smokeless cordite. And so we can really say that giant kelp won the First World War. Almost all the ammunition fired in the second half of the First World War was sourced from Californian giant kelp. So this part, at least, of what we're doing is not new at all. Been done very successfully for over 100 years. We then process it. This is not a real picture of our process facility, but I'm not supposed to show any details for IP reasons, apparently. And we sell the end products. Oh, sorry. A bit overly fast. Yeah, we sell the end products, and I'll talk a bit about that in a moment. So why do we do this? Carbon in a nutshell and biodiversity. The carbon potential of giant kelp forests is huge, and before we get all sorts of scientists neighing and whinnying and protesting, This is potential. There's a lot of science to be done, and we are doing that science via the Kelp Forest Foundation. So patience with this. It's also a long trajectory to get to methodologies. We're working with Gold Standard on this, and it will be done independently and transparently. And once it's done, there will be decades of refining it to get to the right answers. Biodiversity, I think, is more evident to everybody, anybody who's been at sea, that whatever you put in the sea very quickly aggregates life. And kelp forests, even when artificial, it's quite extraordinary how quickly our forests in Namibia become a center of, flourishing center of all sorts of life forms. And I'll show you some pictures of that as well. So to make money, we turn that canopy that we trim into biostimulants. And then we're looking at a variety of other products, but as a business we need to stay focused, so it's biostimulants first, and then we'll look into alginates and food thickeners and plastic replacements and all these other potential things later. On the right side, blue carbon credits, biodiversity credits. In money terms for us, this is not that interesting. It's not what drives the business, and I think that's healthy. But of course, this is why we do it. Quickly, what's a biostimulant? A biostimulant, in a nutshell, is an extract from seaweed or from mushrooms or crustaceans or humic acid from peat bogs. They all do a similar thing, which is that they boost the immune system and ability of a plant to grow. So seaweeds are the forefathers of all land plants. So the fact that they're bioactive compounds which regulate their immune system, which protect them against the very hostile environment that is the sea, work on land plants to a certain extent shouldn't be surprising. How well they work is quite extraordinary. And when I say work well, I mean ultimately for a farmer it's yield increase, but there are a lot of ways in which these things work. So they're better immunity, better fruit setting, better flowering, better root growth, but also the effect on the soil. So it's not just boosting that plant, it's also the bacteria in the soil that are fixing more nitrogen, which means less inputs, which means less runoffs. So the benefits of these things, when applied to the right crops in the right way, are quite spectacular. And so some of our field trials, I won't go into these in details, but we look at all sorts of crops from low value to high value in all sorts of contexts. And it's very cheering that in almost all of them, we come out with pretty spectacular results and also better than most of the competition. And that's commercially, of course, interesting. We're headquartered in Amsterdam, and Caroline runs the small team there. We're most active at the moment in Namibia, where we are growing out seaweed farms and building up our process plant, and I'm based there. We have a small demo project in New Zealand that I'll talk about. We have an application pending in Alaska, and then there are a few other areas where we'd like to expand to. And this is really in order to make sure that that impact is nicely spread across different areas. And as a business, it's also to spread some of our country risk. So why Namibia? We mapped globally where the best upwelling areas are. Upwelling is where deep water comes to the surface. That means nutrients and it means stable temperature. And those are the two things that seaweed needs to grow continuously. We want to have aseasonality where possible, which means our vessels, our processing facility can operate every day that the weather is good enough. And economically that makes a big difference. And that we have growth all the time. So we looked at upwelling, temperature, currents, waves for engineering, seabed, and then we looked at the softer factors, so governance, corruption, cost of doing business, logistics. And Namibia popped out really at number one on the climatological things, and for those of you who don't know Namibia, it's by far the best run country in Africa, and has been extraordinarily supportive on a regulatory framework, very clean, very easy to do business, lovely place to live as well. In Namibia, we have a 1 million hectare license, which you should see more as an exploration license. This holds the water area in reserve for us while we do our research, and we then convert it to a smaller commercial license, which you see on the right. There's a 6,000 hectare license area that's quite deep, 50, 60 meters, fully offshore, exposed conditions off the desert, and then a slightly more sheltered area closer, 400 hectares in about 8 to 20 meters depth. So we do lab and hatchery work there. The complex gametophyte stage is done by Hortimare in the Netherlands, but all the grow out and induction and scaling we do in a hatchery in Namibia, staffed by this small team and then a whole team of interns. It's very manual still at this stage. Operations, so this consists of very heavy equipment for the deep offshore where it's very violent, and then much more manual, simpler stuff inshore. Great fun. My picture's on there. That's because I have a skipper's license, so occasionally when they're short-handed I go. And actually I'm very good at doing what I'm told as well, which some people are surprised to hear. Engineering, so the planning of all these things, and roughly without going into too much detail, you've got the engineering offshore, which is about creating artificial substrates at about 15 meters that whales can pass through safely, that create this bed on which the seaweed, but also all sorts of other organisms can grow, and how we anchor those with screw anchors for minimal impact and good strength. And then on the right, much more sort of biomimicry, is what we call bottom-based engineering, where we have essentially a small concrete block and then a line that keeps the sporophytes, so the small kelps, just out of the resuspension zone of sediments. And what happens is you then have growth, you have mussels, bivalves growing on this line. Over time, the holdfasts grow down into the soil, and you've got sort of artificial single coral reef blocks with one plant growing off it. So these are growing nicely. That's a picture of the first ones that went in December, I believe. It takes about 3 months for the plants to go from 1 millimeter to full growth. The speed at which these things grow is incredible. Industrial batch processing, so I won't go into this in too much detail. It's fairly democratized technologies, chopping, mincing, centrifuging to produce then the end products. Some very interesting new technologies which might interest some people here. So we're working with Radical Builders in the Netherlands, a small shipbuilding company, to make solar-powered autonomous harvesters. So hopefully the first prototype will be operating by the end of this year, about 12 by 11 meters. But if you want a super yacht that burns a little less fuel, I think you should talk to these people. Some project highlights. So here are the pictures of these seaweeds. So that's a frond that Michael is holding there, which would be probably about 15 or 20 meters long. And every few inches, you've got this little gas bladder, beautiful golden green gas bladder, and a long, long, beautiful leaf, sometimes up to 2 meters long. So a lot of weight per plant. And lots of little fish and crustaceans. The one in the middle there hitched a ride in Michael's wetsuit, so he's waiting in a little cup of seawater to be released back into the sea. Very young team, very dynamic, lots of fun, hard to keep up with some days. And then we do a lot of community work. Lüderitz is a small place, always been extractive industries, diamonds, fishing, so a lot of up and down. At the moment, very much on its knees. No good schools, so we've set up a school, also because I need somewhere to educate my children. The picture in the middle is the Deputy Ministry of Fisheries, and they love it. You know, they come to a company where you have very young Namibians autonomously running departments, and this is the future they'd like to see. And I think we therefore have very well-earned sort of political backing at the top level, a lot of goodwill. In New Zealand, 3 areas where we're looking around the Banks Peninsula, around Otago, and down in Bluff, a mix of bottom-based, mid-water, and deep-water work. And so we've done a bit of experimental harvesting to see whether the processing works the same there. We have a small demo license in Akaroa. A lot of the licensing trajectory in New Zealand is dependent on indigenous, so the Maori supporting what you do. So that's Caroline there at the marae, the temple down in Bluff. And what we're doing is a small 5-hectare demo, which we're starting in the coming months to look at what's the conditions like. It does have some seasonality. What works best? Is it sufficient acreage to be economic? You know, and to also have a showcase so that people can come and look at this and not be scared of it and realize that it is really quite as pretty as we claim it to be. And then we're also looking at bioremediation around a smelter, aluminium smelter down in the south, potentially using seaweed, not commercially this case, but to pull out some of the toxins in the sludge that's been dumped there, particularly in the 50s and 60s. So also an exciting and totally different quiver to our, or arrow to our quiver. The 4 R's, so this is how we work internally, but also for our investors, a framework that some of you might be familiar with, and it talks about looking as an investor at different types of returns than just financial ones. So return on inspiration, return on natural capital, return on social capital, and of course return on financial capital. So return on inspiration, we haven't thankfully quantified this yet. We don't have KPIs for inspiration. I think that would be very depressing if we did. But we look at things like a master's student who arrives and on his second day sends, I don't think I've ever had a camera capture me happier. That just, kids, teaching them robotics. So inspiring entrepreneurs, students, young people, old people, inspiring people that we can create a better world and do so without having to turn back to the Stone Age. Return on natural capital, of course, very fundamental to what we do, so we can quantify this a lot better than most companies, and that's in the expected areas. So there's some tickers, the gaming of can we get to 800 species. We promised that kelp forests support that. Let's measure it, and that's great fun. It gives a competitive edge to what the marine biologists are doing. Resilience of that biodiversity, so how does that change compared to the areas around? Ocean acidification, kelp carbon, soil carbon, etc. Return on social capital, so SDG 8, we really look at direct jobs, indirect jobs, but also how do we work with the local business forum in improving town planning? How do we help prepare the town for a future that is more stable, which has to do with us, it might have to do with green hydrogen projects, and so making the town and the community much more resilient and having that progress be driven by the community rather than by sort of drop-in foreigners with cash. And return on financial capital, which at this stage really consists of a sort of, we carefully curate our cap table. Cap table, for those who don't know these terms, means your list of investors. And that's both to make sure we're working with people who are high integrity, but making sure we're working with people who are going to assist us in some way in either raising more money or achieving our goals, be they technical or impact related. So we do aim to return double-digit multiples for early investors, and some of the early investors have already seen that. I would love to attract not only great people from the extractive industries, but also capital. I think that's how we really change the world. So contrary to some people who say don't take Shell's money, I think the more of Shell's money we take, the better the world looks. And we'd like to cycle, at least our view, investors of course are free to do what they want, but we would like to cycle our profits back into more oceans impact, whatever that may be. So a very business-like update. So we just signed a major offtake agreement that puts us in a completely different place in terms of the stress on the company. We're no longer worried about how we sell this. We're now worried about how we produce it and that it's the right product. But that's a very much more pleasant stress to be under than the former. Our first full value chain cycle, and what I mean by that is growing, processing, packaging, and selling the product will be complete hopefully by August. We believe that we can be EBITDA positive, which means an operating profit, so just what comes in, what goes out, if you ignore the unnecessary costs like my salary, that we can make a positive operating profit in Namibia by the end of 2023. That also very much changes the whole story that you tell to investors. You're no longer selling a potential thing, you're selling something that might produce money, and therefore you get capital at a much lower cost, and it becomes a lot easier to fund your growth. We are doing some small fundraisers at the moment in the Netherlands, very curated, very sort of reactive towards to pick the right investors. And in Namibia, we'll be doing a fundraise, not because we need money there, but because our belief is that every entity locally should have a significant local ownership. And in New Zealand, that's indigenous groups. In Namibia, that's a mix of local entities, from individuals to pension funds, etc. What we want is high integrity, fast decision makers, because we move fast, because we innovate a lot, and we want inspiring people, and we want people to be demanding, and we want people who multiply our ability to do things. And then next year should be very exciting. I think we can get to cash flow positive across the group, so across the various countries. We'd like to move to issuing Namibian bonds. I think these will be the first sort of corporate blue bonds of any materiality on the planet, and so the importance of designing these in a way that is a framework for future blue economy, I think is very exciting and a bit daunting. And our view is that what we want to do is have them geospatially referenced so that impact for a change of what you do as an investor is actually measurable to the square meter that you're in, whether you're BlackRock or a grandmother buying a bond for a grandson. or a grandchild. And these credits are early. They won't, sorry, these bonds, they won't have any carbon or biodiversity yet because that's still in development. And so they will give a yield that an investor can accept. Then we'll be raising growth capital in the US, in Alaska, and deploying second sort of product lines next to the biostimulants. A quick little highlight reel, just to give a flavor of what we're doing. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Daniel. My name is Oliver Gregerson. I'm a co-founder and CEO of Ocean Rainforest. And thank you very much for the invitation to give a talk about how to scale up seaweed cultivation here at Monaco Ocean Week. I have, for the last years, or since I first saw this quote, I have been very inspired by the fact that we can grow a lot of biomass in the ocean for food, feed, and other products. And this was a report from 2017. Earlier this week, the Intergovernmental Panel for Climate Change issued their latest annual report. And they're also stating that seaweed agriculture is inherently more manageable as a mitigation response to climate change, as we also heard Tim Flanagan talk about in his opening speech. And as we have seen from the video and the talk from Daniel, when we do seaweed cultivation, we can definitely support the Sustainable Development Goals number 12, 13, and 14. So basically, in my opinion, the more cultivation we do of seaweed in the ocean, the better we do. So we at Ocean Rainforest, we have been for the last 10 years developing systems that where we can grow seaweed in exposed areas. We are located in the Faroe Islands. For those of you who have never heard about it, it's between Scotland, Iceland, and Norway. And it's an archipelago of 18 islands. We are cultivating, we have a license currently for 250 hectares. We are using around 20 or 25 of those on 3 cultivation sites, 2 of them being very exposed to open ocean environment. And you see the upper picture there, a nice day in the winter, and the lower a bit nicer. But we are cultivating on water depths between 40 and 80 meters water depth. The seaweed only grows in the top 10, and we are facing wave heights significantly up to between 6 and 8, and current speed between 1 and up to 1.5 knot. And for those, 1.5 meter per second. And these are extreme conditions. Then we are also based in Santa Barbara, in California, where we have been cultivating giant kelp for the last 2 years, and we have our own R&D permit there, and we are expanding that production. We have an integrated supply chain. We have our own hatchery. This year, we will produce around 500,000 meters of seedlings, because that's what we're going to deploy in the Faroes. We also have a hatchery in Santa Barbara. Then we have a processing plant in the Faroes where we're producing dried products, fermented product, and frozen. We only sell business to business, so we make the seaweed storage staple, and then it's sold into different market segments. In Europe, our intention is to scale up as fast and much as possible in the Faroes, because that's where we have the licenses to do it. But we're also starting up in Norway and Iceland this year, and then we'll continue our commercialization in California. This one. That means that for this year, our target is to scale up in 4 countries, in 2 continents, in 1 year. And believe me, when you're working in the ocean, putting equipment out there, that is a challenge. However, I think this is necessary that we face this challenge, because if we want to see seaweed grow as an industry, we really have to start doing that and scaling up in the ocean. So if we do that, we will have hopefully a lot of biomass. So what to do with that? It's very important, in my opinion, that we have a focus on the market to be aware of how do we want to sell this biomass to which market segments. In our opinion, the food additives, the feed, and the biostimulants are obvious market segments on short term, but we also know on a longer term, a larger scale, products that can replace fossil-based products like packaging material are also potential areas. But even if we look into animal feed, and if we should include 5% of seaweed in dairy cattle feed in Europe and US, we are talking about enormous amounts. In general, the benefits we'll get in these products from seaweed is for humans and livestock, increased health, and for environment in general, improved environment, both by taking up CO2 from the ocean and reducing the carbon footprint when products are being consumed. Questions are often used. What's the carrying capacity in the oceans? How much can we cultivate of seaweed? This is a study that was made in Macrocascade some years ago, when we looked at Northern Europe, and we identified 28 million hectares. If we use the design we are currently using in the Faroes, we could apply that and cultivate seaweed in 28 million hectares in the north of Europe. And if we utilize only 1% of those 28 million, we could produce 8.4 million tons of seaweed per year. Bear in mind, the total global production today is 30 million. So that's 1%. Then in Norway, SINTEF has looked into the Norwegian conditions. And I showed this map also to give an impression of how enormous the ocean is, because I think often we don't grasp it. And this actually, in Norway, they looked at, okay, if we use 20,000 square kilometers, and that is the purple, it's a bit dark here, but that's, I hope you can see it. It's the purple square up there. The estimate is they can produce 320 million tons of seaweed. That's factor 10 of global production today, and remove 50 million tons of CO2 equivalents. That's actually the same as the total Norwegian emission today. And you see, that is a little tiny bit of the Norwegian coastline. So this is the potential seaweed cultivation has as a biomass producer on this planet for the benefit of the people, and also improving the mess we have done in the recent years. So I think it's a too good opportunity to just letting there being underdeveloped. But in order to do it, we need to face this challenge, how to scale up and how to do it at a cost that meets the price points different markets are willing to pay. So I'd use this illustration, the red line is mine, as an indication of where we are today. Unfortunately, we are in the upper left corner. We are not producing a lot in Europe or US today, and we are doing it at a very high cost. If we want to go down this line, we have to come up with methods where we can scale up and reduce the cost, and we have to do it in collaboration with partners that are willing to take this journey. Because there is a surcharge that we have to take in order to go down that line. So I have tried to come up with a financial ecosystem for how we can scale this up. I identified some partners that I would like to see play in this. Of course, we need investors, and fortunately they are keen to invest, not only in ocean rainforest, but in seaweed producers in general. We also need grants, because a lot of R&D, research and development, has to be made, both in the public and the private sphere, in order to develop the know-how that's needed. We also need to talk to consumers and tell them why it's important to increase seaweed cultivation so we get the necessary social license. We also need to provide research, especially decision support, to regulators so we can get the permits to be allowed to go into the ocean and grow. And of course, there has to be demand. Fortunately, there is, especially among those that are less than 40 today, are asking for products that are sustainable and can replace what's done today. And then, very importantly, those big, large food and feed producers have to lead the road and make offtake agreements with those who are producing seaweed so we can get the business rolling. Furthermore, there are standards that are, in some cases, preventing access to the market. These standards have to be adjusted so that a seaweed is not prevented to enter the market just because it's a new innovative resource and more sustainable than something else today. And the regulators have an impact on that. Also, when we are talking about scaling up, it's very important that we start to do what I call codification. We get standards for the equipment we put in the ocean so it's safe and not dangerous. And if it somehow is being destroyed, that we can get the insurance into play so we can develop insurance product. Because that is the key to get CapEx funded by blue finance. And if this ecosystem works, then I believe we can scale up and start reducing the cost. And if we put traffic lights on this, on the driver's side, the seaweed producers, the consumers, the research is there. They're ready to go. The enablers with grants, you can have grants in the US and Europe, no problem there. Investors are definitely interesting. The food and feed producers get a yellow light. Some are interested, some are keen, but more could be. The regulators, they say all the right words, but very often actions do not follow. So they get a yellow light as well. I don't know about these ones, so they get a red one. The blue finance is not there, but that has to come. And perhaps insurance is one way to get that abroad, because many of the standards today either do not exist or are not there. This is how I see the financial ecosystem that has to be in place in order to scale up, and we have to turn all the red and the yellow lights into green, and then we can go full speed ahead. So, on the end, I will throw your attention to a project called CMark. You have some leaflets out there. There we have a market platform. If you're interested to join us on this journey, together with 25 partners, both industries and research institutions, please sign up, have a look, take off what are your interests in, and this is a QR code for the web page. But at the final note, I would say that we at Ocean Rainforest, our vision is to create a local ocean rainforest around the world, and we would like to do that in collaboration with local partners. And we look forward to do that in the coming years. Thank you.
Thank you, Daniel, and thank you, Oliver. We have now heard from two incredible entrepreneurs who have really pushed the industry forward over the last year, and I'm sure there are a lot of questions. So I will open up the floor for about 5 minutes of questions, if you have any. And I've just gotten one from the online panels come through, and it was actually, Daniel, you're relatively new to the seaweed space. Your biggest insight so far?
Biggest insight so far, I think I'm very thankful to Tim, because I should have done this, I think, ages before. Learning something new and diving into a world that you know nothing about as an entrepreneur, and therefore you have to know everything about what you're doing. has been, I think, the most incredible experience of my life. In terms of the humility, in terms of realizing all the amazing people, researchers, entrepreneurs, scientists, regulators out there in a world I didn't even know existed. And then it's a world that allows you to dive underwater and look at beautiful organisms and see these golden green lights. So yeah, should have done this when I was 25 maybe.
Thank you for some fascinating talks. I'm Nick Dadamo here for the Monaco Explorations Indian Ocean Expedition. Daniel, and apologies if this was embedded in your talk and I missed it, has there been an assessment done of how much area in the oceans could be feasible for kelp forestation?
Yeah, I think a number of assessments have been done. I suppose looking at sort of 9% of the oceans that you could use, but I think it's highly theoretical. I think Oliver's slide showing how huge the ocean is and what a small piece you would need to, I mean, what looks like a postage stamp from space to achieve enormous things. I think it's a very theoretical question. There's lots of suitable water, and I don't think we should be doing this all in one spot. I think it should be nicely spread, so we have an archipelago of places that have these halo benefits.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, fortunately, depending on which species we want to grow, but if we are focusing on the brown species, we know that we have the northern hemisphere rim and the southern hemisphere rim. And there we can grow many of the brown species that also are easy to cultivate. And we have done some internal investigations and look at the coastal areas where we have also nutrient supply, either from the anthropogenic, so where we can do bioremediation, or we have upwelling. And if we use 5% of potential coastal areas, we think we can increase the current production of seaweed globally, 30 million ton, by a factor of, believe it or not, but we are getting somewhere between 500 and 1,000, right? That's 5%. This depends very much on how do you add access, do you get access to it, or can you, and how do you cultivate it, in which density? But in my opinion, to get up to a production of biomass where we are talking hundreds of millions of tons, that is, as we saw in that Norwegian slide, relatively easy. If we know how to scale up, know how to fund it, because I'm very confident we can use the biomass. But it has to have a cost where the buyers want to pay, that the buyers want to pay for.
Thank you. Can you speak to the robustness of demand for seaweed feedstock for plastics alternatives, fossil fuel-based plastics? Cost and performance competitiveness is what's key, and I'm just wondering about the robustness there.
Okay, well, I mean, Rodrigo from Notpla will give you a bit of an insight into that a little later in terms of the actual end user who's turning seaweed into plastic replacements. My perspective is that you need quite a large scale before it works, but the plastic world is an economies of scale world. So we've put it at, I think, tier 3 or 4 in terms of areas that we'd like to look at, because of the scale of the sort of processing that you'd need to put together. But I have no doubt that once it comes to that the funding and financing for that sort of ventures, that's can be unleashed quite straightforwardly.
Yeah, no, I don't have so much to add to that. I mean, this is definitely large scale, and we know the price points that we can cultivate at today does not fit. However, as with everything, we have to start somewhere. I mean, this is not a computer program where you can say copy and paste and then you multiply. You have to really get out there, make your lessons, and understand how you can develop technology so you can both scale up and do it at a lower cost. So this is why it's so important to start on that slope and get downwards. But as you probably you could read on that slide, in my opinion, the food and feed markets are the markets and the biostimulants are clearly the markets that are easier to access with the price and scale we're talking about than bioplastics when we talk at large scale.
Thank you so much. My name is Fernando from Oceanborn Foundation. Really impressed by the amount of work that you have done. I would like to have a little bit of feedback about something that is of a concern for myself, which is based maybe on the area of environmental risk evaluation. And I was yesterday at the Global Sea Alliance, and I found that there's a huge movement trying to get together people that is working on different fronts. So the first part of my question is, how do you connect and how do you interlink with this Global Sea Alliance so that we can have like kind of access to a common database? And having access to that common database means feeding the database with your data that you're collecting on the CMARC, for example, project, or in the Namibia project. And collection of that data is quite complex. So I don't know, how do you manage to do that so that we can, at the start, have a picture of where we are, so that in a few years, we can evaluate what is the real environmental impact of what we are doing. Because now I think we are talking more on a kind of hypothetical scenario, but if we really could measure where we are now, and in a few years compare, I think it will be great for this risk evaluation. Sorry for the long question, but...
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's very important, it's very relevant. In CMARC, we are having what we call work package dedicated to quantifying and hopefully also valorizing the marine ecosystem services that might be related, we think positively, but there could also be negatively. So we are currently doing research in terms of identifying which parameters do we want to measure on locations where we haven't started, and so we do have a proper benchmark, and then how we continuously can measure as we are cultivating in order to see the impact, measure the impact, and be able to communicate the impact. So on one part of the question, so how is information shared? Well, in European funded projects, there is a requirement of sharing information. So I think that is one way to do it, and we will do that also in CMARC. But from a more commercial point of view, we also have an interest to continuously measure and communicate what is the ecosystem service we provide, for instance, in taking up nitrogen, phosphorus, and CO2, because that can also be a part of the business model. eDNA might offer one way, and I think Nature Metrics, they can say more about that, but I see eDNA as one potential route to do these measurements fast and hopefully not too costly, but very importantly also to communicate, disseminate with, in principle, dashboards for each site. So stakeholders with interest on these areas, both those who have a NGO interest, but also impact investors and consumers or businesses can see what is the impact we do. I am very convinced, as I think you also could see in the video and what we have seen otherwise, we make a good impact on the ecosystem, both in terms of increasing diversity, reducing acidification. But it's very important for me to prove it, that that's actually what we do. And hopefully somebody someday will say, okay, that's a good thing. You should actually be rewarded and pay me something for doing it. Because that is also what we are doing when we are doing bioremediation. We are enabling protein production in other sectors. And that's another discussion, not for today, but it's a very relevant discussion at some point.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I'd like to add to that, which is an amazing answer, is that that's exactly what we set up the Kelp Forest Foundation for giant kelp. So there's some overlap in what Oliver is doing in California. But to make sure that, you know, there are the things we have to measure for environmental compliance with our license. Frankly, the bar is not very high. Those things are typically designed to show that you're not doing too much damage. That's not what we're interested in. We're interested in quantifying what the good is that we're doing, so that we're not being factual about that. And of course also keeping our eyes out for unintended negative consequences. Because frankly, you look at it and there are very few things that we can come up with. You know, whale entanglement is one that comes up. People have concerns about nutrient use, so aren't you using all the nutrients for the phytoplankton? You know, between us, back of the envelope, you're using maybe 0.02% of the nutrients, so it shouldn't be a concern. But there may be things that we haven't mapped. Ecosystems are complex. These are degraded ecosystems where we're doing something artificial. So we shouldn't be too surprised if there are some outcomes that maybe aren't so positive. You know, maybe we make jellyfish blooms worse for a while. So it's important we measure these things and are then transparent and public about them. So the Kelp Forest Foundation, which Sammy will talk about later, monitors these things, makes the data public so that people can benefit from it, so that people can also copy and improve what we're doing. And that's very important that in the forestry side, at least, this is no sort of secretive business. The impact is much more important than the money making. So everything we do, as soon as we're confident it's the right thing, will go out as a blueprint via the Kelp Forest Foundation so that people can copy that, improve it, do whatever they like with it. On the processing side, we'll be a bit more sort of traditional business as usual and protect our profit.
Daniel Oldevor, thank you very much. I think that's all the time we have for questions at the moment, and we will be moving on, but thank you. These are two gentlemen that are working in the cultivation of seaweed and of the creation of forests and an ocean rainforest, but there are also kelp forests and kelp beds that need to be restored. They're naturally occurring, and they also need our help. So I'd like to introduce our next speaker, CEO and founder of Urchinomics, Brian Tsuyoshi Takeda.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for this opportunity to talk to you a little bit about kelp forest restoration, which I think is also the cousin, perhaps, to kelp farming in our anthropogenic world. Just a little brief introduction of who we are so that there's some context. There we go. So I don't need to explain to everyone here how important kelp forests are to the health of our planet. It's one of the most important ecosystems that we have on our planet. However, due to an unfortunate combination of overfishing of predatory species, climate change, and pollution, we, humanity, has allowed the humble sea urchin to explode in population and overgraze entire kelp forests, turning them into lifeless, desert-like barrens. And these urchin barrens will persist for decades or centuries if we do not intervene. And the problem is this: once they collapse an entire kelp forest and eat up everything, they starve and become empty, and they have no calorific value for predatory species to eat, nor are they worth for fishers to catch. So they will literally occupy the ocean floor, and unlike most other species, they don't die. They kind of just stay in this stasis modus until kelp starts to grow again, they nibble it away, and then it go back to the desert state. So what we do at Urchinomics is we specifically target those ecologically destructive sea urchins, and we rehome them into our land-based recirculating aquaculture systems, where we feed them a naturally derived formulated feed, and we essentially convert them from an ecological pest to one of the world's most premium seafoods, or uni, in about 6 to 12 weeks. And as a result of removing the urchins from the ocean floor, we contribute to the restoration of kelp forests, and wild kelp forests can bounce back as quickly as 3 months, like in California, or, for example, in the Nordics, where the sun disappears for half of the year, it takes about 6 or 7 months, but kelp is incredibly resilient and can come back. So our business model is relatively straightforward and simple. So we remove the urchins, we then ranch the urchins, we then sell the urchins, and we put a percentage of our revenues back into the monitoring, the restoration effort. So the active removing of the urchins directly contributes to the restoration of kelp forests. The funding that we provide then provides the monitoring and the science to make sure that the restoration is in fact happening. And essentially everything that we do contributes to wild kelp restoration. So Our business model has hardwired restoration in its core, so the more we generate revenues and profits, the better the environment becomes. So, poor choice of colors, but our commercial operations are based in Japan. We also have pilots in California, Canada, as well as in Norway, and our intention is to scale up our global operations to the scale and speed in which we have already developed in Japan. And we also have development sites around the world where we are exploring opportunities to grow with local partners. So, for those that may be aware, so Urchinomics was one of the first company in the world to get voluntary blue carbon credits from wild kelp restoration. And we've been asked by many people around in the kelp space how we did it and what happened and how the numbers work. So I thought I would take this opportunity to talk a little bit about how that happened and perhaps burst one of the hype bubbles that might be around blue carbon and the potential of it being the hallelujah solution for the oceans, at least in our context. So just an example of how kelp restoration happens. So here's some pictures from the Bay Foundation. Remove the urchins, the kelp forest comes back in 3 months. Same in Norway, about 6 to 7 months. This is from our Torevokter friends in northern Norway. And of course, the Japanese case is the one that I would like to talk about because this is the one we have the most numbers behind it. So this is in southern Japan. Remove the urchins, kelp and seaweeds grow back. Great. So the question is, okay, so what does that mean in dollars and cents? So I won't go into the details of this, but as this is filmed, you could take a look at it. But essentially, 1 hectare of kelp forest in southern Japan requires the removal of around 1,411 kilograms of sea urchins. That approximately costs us, at $5 a kilo, $7,000 more or less to clear a hectare of kelp forest. The blue carbon that was generated from that hectare credit is approximately 1.5 tons. And the current market price for Japanese blue carbon credits is $587 a ton. We'll come back to that because that's a pretty cool number too. But my point is, despite the fact that that price is 12x higher than most other carbon credits in the world, it still only generates $880. So I have a cost of $7,000. I get a blue carbon credit compensation of $880. It's nice, but you can see that there's still a significant deficit, right? And now, the blue carbon credit is an annual credit. So assuming the kelp forest stays, we will continue to earn that income forever and ever and amen. But if you just use a typical time scale, you're looking at an 8-year return. And that's at the $500 some odd a ton price, which again is 10 to 12x higher than the market. So if it came down to a regular carbon price, that's an 80-year payback period. Now, we at Urchinomics, we can afford this because we can take that $7,000 worth of sea urchins and turn it into $70,000 in 10 weeks. But if you do not have the urchin aquaculture technology or the ability to monetize that biomass, you're in a lot of trouble. So, urchin removal and blue carbon, yes, blue carbon credits are fantastic. I think it's a great way to channel more funding to restoration work, but it's not the panacea. And I think this is the example that I wanted to show today because the numbers speak for themselves. Now, will we continue to pursue this? Of course, because when we are already deploying commercial divers and technology to harvest the urchins, to remove a little bit more of those urchins so that the kelp comes back, that is a very small additionality effort that we can do that anyone else that doesn't have the commercial incentive to remove urchins and ranch them, it's really hard, right? Restoration is hard enough on land. Doing it underwater where you can't breathe is 10 times harder. So we need to use commercial markets and market mechanisms like our business models to stimulate this type of restoration. So in this particular case for us, can we do it? Yes. Can this be replicated in other environments? It's going to be quite challenging. So I want to now focus on another opportunity to talk about the synergies and the compatibility of kelp farming and wild kelp restoration, because I genuinely believe these are brothers in arms and sisters in arms. So first of all, our urchin restoration work is possible because we can monetize the sea urchins and convert them from a pest to a premium seafood. How do we do that? We do it through our feed. Our feed formulation is made by the offcuts of kelp production for human consumption, both wild and farmed. So the success of farm kelp is super important for us in our longevity. Our feed does not contain any fish meal, any fish oil, no hormones, no proteins associated with rainforest deforestation, no antibiotics, not all the stuff that aquaculture typically gets criticized for. We purposely designed our feed away from that, and we're using a waste stream from the kelp industry. That's it, and it's a rough form, and that's what gets formulated into our feed. So please continue expanding the kelp farming industry, because that's going to help us be even more successful. So I want to now talk about how potentially our industry, so that's the title, how our industry can potentially reciprocate back to the kelp farming industry. And this is some really interesting research we came across in Hokkaido, Japan, that we're hoping that we can bring to the West, if it works. So Japanese scientists discovered that sea urchin shells can be converted into a fertilizer for kelp farming. And my understanding is that it is baked into the seed rope. And essentially what the Japanese done is they put it out with the controls and, and with the fertilizer. And essentially they've managed to, after a few years of experimenting, increase the yield of farm kelp production by over 370%. It kind of makes sense, right? I mean, sea urchins essentially eat kelp. And when you break down a sea urchin, they probably have the nutrients that kelp needs. So there seems to be something there, and not just 20 or 30 or 50, but a 370% yield increase, I think has a substantial impact. I'm not a kelp farmer, but according to my kelp farming friends, this could be a game changer in the industry. So my question is, okay, is this a region or a species-specific phenomenon in Japan that cannot be replicated in other places, or maybe can it be? Okay, so the Japanese showed 370%, but I don't know, could a fraction of that still be useful for us? And from my perspective, I think this is a really elegant way for the urchin ranching industry to reciprocate and pay back into the kelp farming space. So I'm very much interested in exploring this. So my ask today to both the audience here as well as digitally attending is I would love to be able to put together a consortium where we can look into this. And we will play our part with the urchins, and it's a waste stream for us anyway. And so if we can find a way to work together and really test this out and see whether this is a Japanese region-specific or species-specific phenomenon, or whether this can be expanded around the world, where we can increase its yield by 100, 200, 300%, and see if we can accelerate the growth and speed of kelp farming around the world. So on that note, I'll take my leave. Thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to connecting in the conference.
You're not off the hook yet, Brian. We have a couple of minutes for any questions for Brian.
Thanks, that was super interesting. I'm Katrina Hurd from the University of Tasmania. And so what do you think it is in the urchin shells that is enhancing kelp growth? Do you think it's trace elements?
To be completely honest with you, this is so outside of my competence, but I mean, UTAS has been leading the research around urchin powder waste, and I think that if we can bring that science together with some of the other researchers around, I think we'll be able to find out that answer relatively quickly.
Yeah, well, so we're trying to grow seaweeds, and I think this is great. We could have a go at that, you know?
Let's talk.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sorry, I wanted to know if there are other opportunities for sea urchin ranching, that are not directed to just resurrecting kelp forests, but also just managing ocean floors in general. Or I'm thinking about Mediterranean, for instance, where there are no kelp forests, but there are definitely a lot of sea urchins. So, do you know of any other?
Absolutely. So sea urchins don't just eat kelp forests. They also eat seagrass meadows, so the posidonias and other stuff that seems to grow in the Mediterranean. Urchinomics is in collaboration with the FAO to explore the various opportunities in the Mediterranean as well, to see if we can bring our business model, restorative aquaculture, to the Med. Just one philosophical point, we recognize that our technology can do a lot of good, so we are not pursuing purely commercial opportunities. We are only pursuing opportunities where we know that we can have ecological restoration and contributions to society. Those are the areas that we target first. Maybe one day when all the kelp forests are back, we can pursue purely profit opportunities, but that's way down the list.
Okay. Thank you for this very inspiring presentation. So I had a question mostly related to the restoration of the forests, and I don't know, maybe I missed it, but were you able to quantify the eventual recovery of the forests? How? And did you think also to some active restoration actions more than this passive restoration with sea urchin callins?
Yes, so to be fair, we purposely targeted areas where we knew the restoration could happen without active support, and we're prioritizing those regions first. But places like in Tasmania, where the warming of the waters plays a significant impact on kelp restoration, there probably is going to be a need for collaboration with replanting of the proper genetic species, like Kane Leighton and others are doing. So I think each case is going to be unique, but we will be pursuing the lowest hanging fruit first to prove that this can be an investable commercial case first. But of course, we don't have that much time before 2030, before everything goes to shit. So clearly we need to collaborate and partner, and if that means working with other scientific institutes and other partners to create a silver buckshot of solutions, let's go for it.
Thank you.
Any other questions? One more. Any other questions? One more. Daniel.
So a lot of seaweed farmers in Europe, Brian, have this struggle that uptake of seaweed into the diet is slow. Consumers, well, how does that work with sea urchins? What does the demand like outside the traditional countries that are used to eating this?
We originally thought the market for sea urchin roe would be exclusively in Japan, and boy was I wrong. Sea urchin, I guess because sushi becoming so popular in the 90s, with the East Asian markets like China starting to eat sea urchin roe, the prices have gone through the roof. During COVID, we anticipated, like champagne and caviar, for prices to collapse. It increases 40 to 70%. So we're now at, last year, the peak prices were over $900 a kilogram for sea urchin roe. We're averaging around $500 per kilo in our sales in both Europe, North America, and Japan. But what I thought was a relatively high price point, because the wild urchin prices continue to go up, we're kind of mainstream pricing, so we're actually at price parity with the wild market. It's one of the reasons why we were able to launch with a national chain in Japan in what I would consider a mid-tier restaurant for sushi. So I think that we're at the economics where we can actually just scale, and that's pretty much what we're planning to do right now, is to really prove to ourselves and our investors that we're not just a Japan-specific phenomenon, and that we could do this in other places in the world.
Thank you very much, Brian. And Brian called for collaboration, and our next speaker is probably the king connector and collaborator of them all in this seaweed space. And if you're not familiar with seaweed, then well, if you are, this gentleman almost needs no introduction, but if you're not familiar, I'm going to introduce him. His name is Adrien Vincent. He is, Vincent Demisel, sorry. Senior Advisor for UN Global Compact, so welcome.
Thank you very much for this. Thank you for the organization. Thank you, Kelp Blue, for organizing this. All protocol observed. I'm trying to speak UN, Anyway, no, thank you very much for being here today. Yeah, most important message is that the Safe Seaweed Coalition will become the global seaweed coalition, fully hosted by the United Nations Global Compact this year. So we will move from startup to scale up with this coalition. But I think an important point here, and I will not cover this slide because I always do slides that I told totally different things, is that we have the IPCC report that just has been released this week, and clearly there's no time for being scared. It's no time for finding people who are guilty or whatsoever, or looking for guilty people, looking for excuses. It's time for action. And we have a very nice solution. We are very lucky in this room because we have a very, very good solutions. Surely not the silver bullet, but clearly a jack of all trade that can support addressing a lot of the biggest challenge of our generation. We all know about world hunger, we all know about the climate change, the phosphorus peak that is coming, and the phosphageddon that is treating our civilization is another topic that seaweed can help a lot. So we have a multifaceted solution, and we have to work on it first, and we have to go out and spread the word as well. It's important because you see, here I can see, and it's nice, a lot of familiar faces, and which is good. But we have a saying in France saying you're dancing with your sisters. I mean, which is not normally the ultimate objective of dancing, even though it could be nice. So yeah, I can see a lot of converted people here, and we need to go out and convert new people, young people mostly. It's funny because last week I was invited to a TV show in France, which was filmed in an underground theater packed of 700 protesters because they were right from the street. We were on stage with the head of the Socialist Party, some homeless people, activist singers, and so forth. Here we are in Monaco this week. I haven't heard any protests in the street so far. And next week I'm invited in Caribbean by the government to speak with schools and children and authorities in order to change, which will need request a lot of optimism, the image that they have about seaweed and sargassum notably, of course, moving from the perception of a plague to an opportunity. That's what we have to do, I think, all of us, is to get out and spread the word. So in order to do that, we needed to have the message right and agreed by everyone, which is why we have designed, some years ago, the Seaweed Manifesto. You should all be familiar with that. So led by the Lloyd's Register Foundation, who supported this seaweed journey from the start. And United Nations Global Compact as well, who was like a leadership and a visionary position into that. And we partner with the CNRS, and Philippe will give a talk in a few minutes, because we wanted this to be science-driven, of course, and we don't want to reproduce for the seaweed industry the same mistakes we did on land with GMO, monoculture, into industrial farming, and so forth. So, so we gathered a lot of organizations, and some of them are in this room, in order to build a 10-page document that will be the basis to spread the word about what the seaweed can do and what should be done and what are the hurdles. One of the main hurdles was the lack of cooperation and the high level of fragmentation, outside of Asia at least, in this very nascent but promising industry. So we have created the Safe Seaweed Coalition. Why safe? Because safe has a strong convening power. You're not competing on safety, so you can collaborate. 3 pillars: consumer safety, product safety, environmental safety, occupational safety. That was the ultimate objective of the coalition, to support these 3 pillars, which are once again highly, convening. So we designed the team in order to do that for the last 2 years. It is now once again hosted by UN Global Compact. The scientific direction is done by Philippe Potin. We have Sophia, who is here and can wave their hand, with the head of the Secretariat now, and you can go and see her, because once again we are here to spread your story. So we are here to voice your story. So we need to hear from you. Azedine is in charge of communication. Nicolas, a former World Bank exec, is leading the operations now and is our US leg. and Eric is the head of the UN Global Compact Ocean. We have another newcomer. It's not there on here, but you all know him, and he doesn't need any introduction. Adrian Vincent, who will support our funding. Not from his own pocket, I think he will. Not only, at least. And we have also in the room Rebecca here, who is working on the plastic treaty. Wave your hand, Rebecca, for UN Global Compact. So anything related to plastic and seaweed might be of interest to her. So that's the team, and it will grow further and further. Once again, 3 action pillars: funding. We received a few millions from the Lloyd's Register Foundation, and we expect to collect much more in the upcoming years, now that we are UN. So a lot of our money will go back to you all. And we can see right now the impact that the 2 million we have already granted to our members is having in terms of accelerating research, accelerating innovation in this supply chain. So funding is the core of our action. Advocacy, once again, we should spread the word. We'll see we have a list of events to come. I met here with the head of the COP28 yesterday, or before yesterday. We really position clearly seaweed as a way to mitigate carbon for the COP28. And I think it's great to advocate. I mean, we all come from algae. I mean, we were all algae 4 billion years ago, floating in the ocean. And I think the algae has shaped our past and can really save our future. That's what we have to spread the word. Daniel clearly mentioned the fact that the only time in history in the Western world where we invested massively on seaweed was to win the First World War. And indeed, I mean, this giant kelp for gunpowder generated hundreds, millions of investment in California because it was a war effort. I mean, we need a war effort right now if we want to address the 3 big crises of our generation. So we need investment. We could tell the story about Azolla event as well, which is a seaweed that proliferated on the planet 50 million years ago, and that decreased the temperature of our planet by 20 degrees. And that created the climate we have today. So once again, there's a lot of story, and we are human beings. We are sapiens because we were eating a lot of seaweed full of polyunsaturated fatty acids that make our brains this way. These stories have to be told to everyone because we need, it's time for action. And of course, science, all of this needs to be driven by science, and we need to be very careful about what we do and what we say with seaweed. So we have created the coalition. Here is the map. So all our stakeholders are on the map. It's absolutely free. You can join this coalition. We have already more than 1,000 members worldwide and a lot of registered companies. Well, that's our grantees, so we have already supported 25 different projects in 5 continents, 20 countries for 2 million euros roughly. We will have another round of call for proposal this year, and hopefully much more in the upcoming year. We need to find, once again, we need to fund our coalition now. So if you know any funders that are of interest to support the most fascinating solution of our planet, feel free. But yeah, so we will keep doing this over the next years, and you can see a lot of familiar names here as well. The big key upcoming event, so Monaco is here, of course. We have another interesting one, which is the Seaweed Revolution book launch in London. So I would say we, but that's my name on it, but it's really a collective action, and I'm telling your story in this book. So the Seaweed Revolution, which has been released in France a year ago and now in Spain, will be released in London on the 27th of April. So if you are not invited, feel free to tell me. We will be there for the UN General Assembly for the World Bank Spring meeting. Very quickly, a word on the EU Algae Day, because I will need all of you to be involved into that. We are having the first political meeting, which is a meeting organized by EU in collaboration between EU, the French government, and the coalition, the Seaweed Coalition. We will gather all the state members in Paris at the Maison de l'Océan, once again, for 3 days, actually, a political meeting, and we will need you, solution providers, the ones that are leading and pioneering these solutions, to show, and not only from Europe, but from Asia as well and all over the world, to show these political representatives what seaweed can do and what it can be. So we'll have 2 days of political meeting, 1 day open to public, 5 to 7th of October. Then FAO, then COP28, of course, and COP16 next year. Moving very fast because I'm out of time, and Caroline will whip me out with the macrocystis if I stay here. So we are launching Blue Bonds as well, which is an interesting topic I know for Daniel, as of June 2023 with United Nations Global Compact. We are very active on that. Seaweed is a core topic. It's one of our 5 tipping points. So we will be very active on that. So stay tuned. Happy to discuss that further. We have a dedicated resource for this. Another interesting information is that LR Foundation is strengthening its partnership with UN Global Compact, and we will open ocean hubs, supported and funded by the Lloyd Register Foundation, in all these red dots that you see here. We'll have dedicated resources for ocean in these UN Global Compact offices, and notably for seaweed. So the idea is, once again, stop dancing with our sisters in Europe, spread the word where it needs to be done in these countries where we will have local resources. We have to, it's a global topic, but we have to go local as well and have local office. We may have very soon someone from Indonesia in the team, in the secretariat as well. So I'm done. Thank you very much. You can join the Seaweed Coalition here. If not done already, become part. I mean, you will get a lot of information. We have an ambassador program as well that is very interesting because we feel more and more people coming to us and telling us, how can we help you with our skills from all different type of sectors and retired people, students or whoever, I mean like volunteers. So we have a program for them. And we still have to leverage on that. And we are, once again, giving information as much as we can, funding projects and bringing the community together so we can speak with one voice. And please tell us your story, because we are here to spread your stories. You are the pioneers doing the work, and it needs to be said. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Oh, thank you, Vincent, very much. And the book is fantastic, and it's coming out indeed very soon, so buy the book. We are going to be hearing from 2 speakers right now. They are at the forefront of developing next generation products, and I'd like to now introduce the CEO and co-CEO and founder of Notpla, Rodrigo Garcia Gonzalez.
Good morning, everyone. Some familiar faces on the audience, and I spoke yesterday as well, so I'm going to try to be quite short on this. Everyone is quite familiar with plastic objects. We believe they are great. Actually, they were invented in the same place where we are based, in the same warehouse. In 1856, Charles Parkers invented thermoplastic, and he started to make wigs with this material. And now we use it for quite a lot of different things. There's a few things that probably you don't know about plastics, but to produce these objects, for example, a plastic bottle, you need 7 liters of water. So it's quite a lot of water just to produce a plastic bottle. And normally the average time of use of these products is 10 minutes, even if, and every year we consume more and more, so the trend on plastic goes higher and higher. So every year we consume 10% more plastic as a society. And the numbers are crazy. Every person in the world, we consume around 200 of these objects every year. And we know all this. I don't know, this was a video, I don't know if this plays, but like basically this is microplankton eating microplastics. So this as well is where plastics start to enter our ecosystems and our organisms. It says that every month we consume up to 5 grams of plastic, which is the equivalent of a credit card of plastic, which is quite scary. That's why we created a few years ago back in London, in the university, this product. We call it O. Basically, it's a scale-up version of this other product that probably, I don't know if you have tested. It's a spherification, basically, fake caviar that was invented in the 30s, so last century, by a gentleman called Peschard, who was working for Unilever. And basically, we just took similar type of processes and scale it up to use for packaging. This is a membrane, or is a process that is made with seaweed. This is some of the seaweed that we use. These are our friends from Carrymore. It's a seaweed farm in Wales that we have been collaborating with. And basically, the advantage of this membrane is that you can eat it. I brought some for the ones who were not there yesterday. We can taste it afterwards. But you can see on the right-hand side of our screen, our membranes in less than 10 days they disappear. Then an orange skin, it will take around a couple of weeks to disappear. Paper or cellulose will take around a month in normal composting conditions. And what is called bioplastics, that they are normally chemically modified, they will never go away in this type of conditions. And basically, yeah, how we started was in a kitchen, so we were just inviting friends for dinner and repackaging these type of products, and basically coming up with the same solutions as nature. So we believe that nature knows best. That's our main value. And we say, yeah, you cannot open or close nature, but you have small segments and you have skins, for example. We started to make machines. We launched it in 2017, a crowdfunding campaign that helped us. So a lot of people could put from 10 pounds to a few thousands to invest in our company. So since then, we have more than 900 investors in our cap table. And we have been doing things to package different type of liquids. We were in the 2019 London Marathon, where we provide to every runner with this hydration solution. We have done things like Roland Garros with Tropicana. We had a bar as well in South Kensington, doing alcoholic shots. This was a video. We have now a couple of vending machines in London for hydration on the go, one in King's Cross. If you are taking the Eurostar, please stop by. And yeah, different opportunities in different contexts, and things like ketchup or mayonnaise as well for takeaway delivery was quite well. From here, we went to these other issues that other basically contents could have. So this is the favorite product of Vincent, the olive oil pipette that you can control the dosage, not necessarily designed to be eaten, but just to be used as a package. Or we always ask the question if whatever product is a fruit, what type of fruit will be. If toothpaste was a fruit, will be probably more like a blueberry, or if ketchup was a fruit, will be a little cherry tomato. So we're trying to find those analogies. We started to apply the same material to basically cardboard for this issue that we were not too aware at the beginning, but the partner that we work with on the ketchup sachets called Just Eat make us aware of that basically on takeaway boxes you see cardboard, but inside really there is plastic. And that makes quite a lot of challenges. First, for recycling, you cannot recycle the plastic, neither the cardboard when that happens. And as well, there is quite a lot of chemicals involved. So we started to apply the same coating into cardboard boxes and doing this type of packaging for Just Eat. The moment we distribute this in 8 different countries across Europe and trying to expand this year much more. Basically, we do different type of SKUs, and yeah, the videos are not playing, but like basically the main difference, even if it's an invisible product, is that most of these boxes, they contain either plastics or either what is called forever chemicals, so materials really similar to Teflon. I don't know if you have seen the movie Dark Waters from Mark Ruffalo. I really recommend it. Explains a bit the story of how all these Teflon derivatives become into our blood and into our body. And yeah, we're trying to make a difference with that now on the millions, which is quite exciting. We start to work as well around flexible films to basically use the same material in existing packaging machinery and try to make different type of products from screw sachets. This was a collaboration with IKEA to make sachets that you can solubilize after you use them, or things for food. You can try to add some value as well to the packaging, so it's not just packaging that disappears, but add some functionality into it. In this case, it's sugar in the membrane, so if you want the coffee with sugar, you leave it there. If you want the coffee without sugar, you take it out. And going as well a bit into the soluble space, at the moment, probably you are familiar with the films that they are in the detergent machines. Those are called PBA or PBOHA. That basically is this material comes from plastic, and is a bit, even if it dissolves, there's a bit of question mark in terms of how you should classify this type of plastics. And we're trying to use seaweed as well for tapping into this market, and things like polybags as well. Trying to sometimes add some functionality like flavor or odor into our films as well. And yeah, trying to go almost market by market and solution by solution. From the seaweed, normally we use the hydrocolloid part. We use mostly brown or earth seaweeds, and this normally represents around 20% of that we use for this type of products. And the rest that until now is a bit of a byproduct. We have not been using it until a couple of years ago, that we started to do different things with it. So we started to do seaweed paper, basically integrating that fiber that has quite a lot of cellulose content into making paper. So at the moment this paper is 30% seaweed and the rest is recycled paper, but we have produced the first 100% seaweed paper, not in an industrial scale yet, but like this is something that is coming, and yeah, seaweed paper it's quite strong. It's not easy to write on it. I always make the joke that you need to write in really big letters, so it's a quite democratic paper, because even if you have glasses, you will see what is written on it. And we're trying to use this same type of material for our own products. Like we buy a lot of paper at the moment for producing our boxes. And we started as well to compress this material into different products. So we launched it a couple of months ago, this collaboration with a luxury watch brand from Geneva, who does these really expensive watches, and we do the case. And once you receive the watch, you have it in your wrist, you can put the case, you can solubilize it and use it as fertilizer for your garden. And as well trying to jump into other type of processes that at the moment are used in the plastic industry, like injection molding. So I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rodrigo. And there will be a chance to ask questions after our next speaker, who I'd like to introduce. She is Kirsten Schmeduch, and she is the Head of Sustainable Development of Nestlé Purina.
Thank you very much. A warm welcome. That was very impressive. I've been very inspired. So, very good to be here. Thank you very much for the invitation. I would love to share a little bit where we are coming from as an industry and what is actually our entry point. Just a few words about Purina. Our whole purpose is to create richer lives for people and pets. And we are a global leader in nutrition, already 129 years old. We belong to the overarching Nestlé group, and we have a big, big network of scientists in all kinds of areas. We have very strong brands. I don't know how many of you have a pet, a cat, or a dog. You might have one of our products. It's a very emotional category, so we can bring our pets to the office, so it's really something that we live every day. And we are very passionate lovers of pets. But we do care as well, not only about pets, but as well about the planet. It's really core to our belief, to our belonging, and to our purpose. So let me try to share a little bit why we are here today and what is our entry point and why we are on a seaweed event. So when we look at the impact of our business, we looked at the 9 planetary boundaries, trying to understand, we as a business, where do we impact each of these planetary boundaries? So climate change, biodiversity through what we source, nitrogen and phosphorus runoff from the agriculture, from where we source our ingredients, the ocean acidification from which we source the fish for our pet food products, and looked at the whole analysis. At the same time, we tried to understand as well how all these changes, climate change, ocean acidification, is actually impacting us as a business and our ability to have a long-term supply resilience. So it comes from a very core business content that we are actually interested to understand what is the impact that we create and how the world is changing and that is impacting us. As part of the Nestlé group, you see here our CO2 footprint, if I look into climate, and 95% of Nestlé's emission, but as well very much Purina's emissions, are coming from outside of our own core operations. So 95% is in scope 3, meaning the ingredients we source and buy, packaging material we buy, and 70% for Purina is coming from ingredients. And when I say ingredients, it's cereals, it's vegetable protein, it's the fish we source. We have a lot of fish in our products, especially the cat food products, and poultry byproducts. And that is really the core of what will help us to tackle, first of all, climate, but as well biodiversity loss. So if you start with the ingredients, how is that now connected? What do we do about that? A critical part of our roadmap for climate and biodiversity is regenerative agriculture. So how do we source our ingredients in a way that is actually increasing carbon soil health, that is looking at more sustainable way of regenerating the soil? And you can see the main pillars that are really around biodiversity, the soil, the water usage, and the livestock in the feeding in the wider world. So Nestle and Purina have made both the commitment that 20% of our ingredients will be sourced from regenerative agriculture by 2025 and 50% by 2030. That's quite a fundamental challenge, because it means that we need to invite everybody in our value chain to actually transition to a more regenerative way of, first of all, doing agriculture, but as well sourcing. So when we talk about regenerative agriculture, that is where new nature-based solutions come into play. So we have priority actions, and as you can see, one of them is around fertilizers, because right now there's a lot of use of synthetic fertilizer, which creates the nitrogen and phosphorus runoff in the soil, up to the rivers, into the ocean. So what we have is a system that is actually creating for us, from the sourcing of the fish in the ocean on one side, an issue, because the more the oceans acidify, the less likelihood that we will have long-term supply of healthy fish stocks. And on the other hand, we are actually destroying the soil in the long term, which means we will have more difficulties actually to get our cereals and vegetable protein. So that is why we have been looking into shifting to more restorative and circular system. I took that design because I think it perfectly illustrates how we can turn from a vicious to a virtuous circle in the way how we look at seaweed as an opportunity. So if you look at the nitrogen and phosphorus runoff that comes with the synthetic fertilizers in the soil and goes in the ocean, what we need to do first is actually put a tap on that. We need to actually shift to fertilizers that are not synthetic and that don't issue so much nitrogen and phosphorus. So that is one element that we need to look at. And the other one is really looking at the ocean. How can we help regenerate and restore the ocean in order then to create a circular system that will help us, first of all, to stop the issue in the first place, and then as well build overarchingly that virtuous circle. So in that sense, we really truly believe that you need to explore nature-based solutions that can help us. And that is why we support a consortium-based study, and you have some of our partners here in the room, with Wageningen University, FERA, AgriCarbon, Naturematics, the Kelp Forest Foundation, and Purina, to really help try in a 3-year study understand how can we look from a lab perspective, but as well from on-field trials, how that circular solution is going to work. So, how are the plants going to perform? How are they impacting soil health? How are they looking at soil carbon, ability to capture more carbon in the soil, the biodiversity and the organic carbon in the soil, and as well the nutritional content of the crops. What is as well an important part of the study is to look at the plant resilience actually to abiotic stress, so drought, heat, etc. It's 3 years, there's a postdoc, and that is going to be coming as well with on-field trials. The on-field trials, we are going to do that in our value chain, so in our supply chain, building it back to the ingredients, working with our farmers, trying to have pilot farmers to look at the ingredients that we ultimately use in our products to create really the whole loop back. That is what I wanted to share. I think it's very exciting. I'm very happy that we can contribute as well from a different angle, from a science perspective for that, but as well trying to see how all the solutions that everybody's working on, we can try to help in our supply chain to really create the end-to-end value chain of all these partners that are coming together. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Kirsten. And we have some time, and Rodrigo, please come for questions. Does anybody have any questions?
Just amazed, Rodrigo, this is incredible. I really enjoyed. I would like to ask you, because we are in the process of developing a system to put our beers in ocean beer, in packs that are somehow more sustainable, the labels that become part of the system as well. So really appreciate how fast you're developing, and it will be great to have a word. I'm not sure, have you been able to develop a bottle that would last enough to keep the water, the beer, or whatever is inside long enough? Or are you working on that? And I would like to ask also a question for the regenerative agriculture. That was amazing, Kirsten, thank you. My aim as a master brewer in the Ocean-Born Foundation is to make a carbon zero beer. And as far as I know, legally the only way I can do it is with regenerative barley. Can you put me in contact with any regenerative barley producer in Europe? Thank you.
Thank you. Fernando, right? Yes, I think we are going to have a conversation later as well, and I think our teams have been in touch. We are not focusing at the moment of trying to replicate a bottle, so probably that's a bit the short answer. We are trying to find solutions for hydration on the go, but I think a bottle probably is a bit too far for us to aim, at least in the short term. We are working on making coatings for different things, so we are trying to aim now to make coffee cups. So that's a bit the next frontier for us. It's not something that is easy because you need quite a lot of different properties that plastic does really well. So you can heat seal the coating, and you can resist really high temperatures and acidity, etc. It's always a compromise of how long you are going to make a material last in a shelf and how much you are going to make that material last in the environment. So you cannot ask for both things, of something that is going to be intact in a shelf of a supermarket for 20 years, and something that is going to disappear like this. So at the moment we are just focusing mostly on short-term consumption in small volumes. That's a bit where we have something to say. Not too much on long-term shelf life or keeping things for long.
Yes, I would be very happy to put you in contact. I think the whole beer model and the brewery byproducts is as well something that we are looking at as a stream into pet food. So we have been working as well with breweries to look the byproducts that stay basically after the beer production process, and have integrated that in some of our dog snacks already. So we are looking really as well at circular solution. That's why I'm really happy to have very different industries here that are not the most obvious one to connect, but I think finding these waste streams from other sectors in order to revalorize them is actually at the core of pet food. You know, when you take the chicken breast first and the carcass goes into pet food, and that is a fantastic nutrient for pets. So looking at other streams is absolutely, and for regenerative agriculture as well.
Yeah, this is to Rodrigo. Thanks for the presentation. Very interesting and great work you're doing. Two questions. Do you have any estimate on what kind of quantities you'll be looking for in the next 5 years? And second, do you have a preference for seaweed species for instance, the coating product that you are doing?
So yes, I suppose if I start with the second question of like what type of seaweed species, yes, we have different preference, not only in terms of materials, if that makes sense, or in terms of mechanical properties that these seaweeds could offer, but as well, I think you touched on it quite well in your presentation, what type of price points as well we can make this biomass to work in the packaging space. Packaging is a quite commoditized play. I don't know if people are aware, but like plastic is subsidized by most of the countries, so it's much more expensive to import seaweed than to import plastic. any other type of biomass, things like paper, are taxed around like 20%, when plastic normally the average taxation is less than 10 for sure. So things need to change on that front. In terms of quantities, it really depends product by product what we are trying to do. We are trying to more and more trying to see how we can go not to really purify hydrocolloids, but like for things that they are really close to almost using the full biomass of the seaweed. If it cannot be possible in one product, trying to use it in several products and try to combine, because we believe is the way as well to reduce price and to be more conscious as well on how we work and we don't produce waste. In terms of quantities, in 5 years' time, well, probably all your graphs, like my graph, they look like this. So I don't know where it ends. In terms of 5 years, I could not give you a number right now. I know the capacity this year we have is 50 million products that we plan to replace. Most of it is at the moment on the cardboard boxes, so it's at the moment most of the, and it's really little seaweed, if that makes sense, on those products, because we just put 4 grams in each of the papers. So it's, at the moment we are not buying like hundreds of tons, if that makes sense, of hydrocolloid, but like I think we, hopefully, as we go up, this is something that is coming.
We have time for one more question.
Thank you, Rodrigo. Philip Boyd from Australia. It's really a follow-on question to the last person, and that was, given the very exciting and impressive range of products that you showed in your presentation, what happens when Nopla becomes a runaway success in terms of upscaling? So as I say, it's really a follow-on from the previous question. I think you indicated that's the upscaling trajectory, so, but obviously that will be an issue given the ubiquitous nature of plastics and our sort of demand for them. So at some point, you know, when do you hit peak kelp?
Yeah, good question. I think, again, we are trying to diversify as much as we can our supply chain ourselves. We know like kelp as such, at the moment, if that makes sense, is peak, and we don't want as well to kind of like go over that peak until people like some of the speakers that we heard before start to produce in another scale, if that makes sense, that we are at the moment as a society. We are introducing quite a lot of new seaweed species and things like sargassum and other type of biomass that at the moment is not used. Sometimes we get paid to collect that seaweed, not ourselves, but like some of the partners. So sometimes, yeah, we are paying sometimes like 30 pounds per kilo, or sometimes we get paid to take that biomass. So it's trying to combine these different type of biomass that comes sometimes from the ocean. We started to use as well other type of solutions or materials. We are starting to use quite a lot of fruit peels at the moment that comes from different source, but like it's quite beautiful for us to, when we work with a client that have a content, like potentially Nestlé, they will have a lot of biomass as well coming out of that. So at the moment, for example, we are using quite a lot of peels, I think I touched yesterday, of almonds, for example, to introduce into the packaging, and that's quite big scale, or peels of tomatoes, or peels of potatoes, and each of them, they have quite a lot of, I suppose, materials there that, surprise, surprise, they're really good to contain whatever they normally contain, that is the product inside. So we are trying to understand how we can combine these two biomass, so we are not completely as well dependent on putting pressure into seaweed itself.
Thank you. And we're on to our final session of the day.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Adrian Vincent. I'm the founder of the Seaweed for Europe Coalition, and now working with the European Commission on their EU for Algae program, and also at the global level with the Global Seaweed Coalition. I will have the privilege of facilitating this final session on science, and before that, just allow me to warmly thank Robert Calcagno and his team of the Oceanographic Institute, Foundation Prince Abel I of Monaco, for welcoming us and for been championing the seaweed agenda for many years now. This last session is about science and how science could and should guide the development of a truly regenerative seaweed industry. So last year during the Seaweed Day in the exact same place, we spoke a lot about seaweed and carbon, and this morning we talk a lot about seaweed and carbon, and that's why for this last session, we wanted to cast light on another topic, which is seaweed and biodiversity, and what the science has to tell us about that. So we will be listening to two wonderful speakers, and that will be followed by a moderated discussions, and if time allows, some Q&A. Our first speaker is a true seaweed guru and pioneer. He has been working on seaweed for, Philippe, I speak on 35 years, if not 40. And so he will be telling us about the status of knowledge and science today when it comes to seaweed and biodiversity. So please give a warm welcome to Philippe Potin, Senior Research Director at the Station Biologique of Roscoff.
So thank you, Adrien. Thank you to the organizer of this wonderful session this morning, and thank you also for the organizer of the Monaco Ocean Week to give me the opportunity to talk this morning. I will talk about the biodiversity issues which are behind the seaweed cultivations, and I think it's a very important question where some of the speakers this morning have addressed some of the social licensing which is required to operate in different regions of the world. Sometimes it's easier than in others, and people working in California will not contradict me that it could be difficult to operate some seaweed cultivation in California. And so this is why it is important to really tell about the reality of the seaweed industry, not to promote only hypes about seaweed industry. So I will try to provide you with a picture of what is the correct knowledge about the different impacts, which could be positive or negative, of the seaweed cultivation in terms of biodiversity. But it is based on collective project. It is not most of the time on research. I was just coordinating this research during the last years, and I really thank in advance all the contributors of these results I will present today. So I will start by a negative impact on an image which could be in fact promoted by the opponent of the development of seaweed cultivation. Developing large-scale cultivation of seaweeds could have very harmful effects and lead to completely unpredictable impacts, such as the development of huge green tides in China, as it was in fact advertised in many news during the last 15 years, especially during the Olympic Games at Beijing. And so this is one of the consequences which could not be anticipated by the development of our nori cultivation in this area was operated in muddy areas which were without any hard substrates for the settlement of seaweed seedlings, especially for green seaweeds. And as soon as the aquaculture structures were developed, the green seaweeds started to also colonize the structures and then also to reproduce and then produce the huge green tide, which is not only, of course, due to the fact to develop aquaculture. It's mainly due to the eutrophicated status of these waters in China. And of course, cultivating nori is a benefit, but it could have negative impact. So how we can oppose very much more positive results to this type of opposition to seaweed cultivations? So it could not be done only by working with seaweed aquacultures. We really have to work together with other aquacultures, and especially with the shellfish industry. There were many efforts to develop and to understand the impact of developing shellfish industry in different countries. And sometimes this industry is not giving the good example. But in the recent literature, which was provided in different reviews in aquaculture, we have some meta-review of about 45 studies, mainly done with shellfish farming, but also operating with some seaweed cultivation operation, including in tropical waters, so, which were indicating what could be the impact of developing the agriculture will have in terms of negative. And of course, it is dependent of many vectors, which could be, of course, the local environmental conditions, which could be also the intensity of scale of the culture, or scaling up, of course, is of importance. The species which are cultivated, and here we have the Japanese oysters, which is now a global oyster, I would say. And then, of course, the cultivation structures and also operation which could be done, and then the aquacultural practices. So there were many results in these reviews which were discussed, and I will just show one, which is quite interesting for seaweeds, because it is showing that seaweeds are providing an increase in the biodiversity in terms of species richness in comparison with the abundance effects here, which are compared between different cultures. And for seaweeds, we have really, in sometimes, an increase in the diversity of species. But of course, biodiversity is not only a number of species, and we have to address also a number of other questions. And among the review which were published recently, there is this one from Campbell from 2016, which are providing some of the driver of environmental changes, which could be, in fact, appearing when you are developing seaweed cultivations, especially on long line on this type of systems. So this review was addressing the question of absorption of light, absorption of nutrients, of course, and depending, of course, of the two effects, you can say it could be negative or positive. The absorption of carbons, again, positive, and also the absorption of kinetic energy. And then you are a number of effects which are indicated here, which are from purely physical effects and to also biological impacts in terms of providing habitats for new species, but also for diseases, parasites, and non-native species. The release of reproductive material from the cultivation, the artificialization of the habitat, and of course the addition of materials in seawater, which could have, in fact, positive but also negative impact. So I will mainly focus on one study which was operating during an innovation action funded by European Union in Europe during the last, during four years and a half, between 2017 and 2021, which is a genial project, in which a team from the National University of Galway has provided really a very interesting methodology for addressing the question of the seaweed farm impact. And of course, by choosing a site which is located on the west coast of Ireland, in the Wentry Bay, which is a classical suspended ropes cultivation with buoys, which is operating the cultivation of sugar kelp on wingle kelp, alaria, and which is in fact providing an interesting case study with a 12-hectare farm. The farm was equipped with a lot of different probes and equipment to measure different parameters, which could be physical or chemicals, to measure, of course, the abiotic condition in the sectors, but also to evaluate a lot of biological parameters, including the macrofauna and the macrofauna, the fish assemblies, which could be present in the farm, and also some interesting devices which were used to monitor the fate of organic matter which could be released by seaweeds, developing some traps for sediments and so on, but also measuring current velocities, and also light exposure at the bottom of the farm. And of course, that was deployed in the farm, but also in control zone around the farm. And it provided some interesting aspects of which were related to the eutrophication in the zone, which could be improved with potential negative impact of with primary reproducer, which is the phytoplankton, and the way that attenuation, which could be measured, the increased sedimentation, which could be seen as positive, but also as negative, depending on what is your purpose. And of course, we have done a lot of quantification of nutrients removal during the processes, and it was measured by in this farm, but also in Ulva farms, which were operating land-based during the Genial project. And what was also done by the colleagues from Sintef in Norway was to compare the growth performances of sugar kelp in the vicinity of salmon farm, which is providing an increased nutrient availability with the reference. And it is clear that, in fact, kelp are growing faster and bigger in the vicinity of salmon farm, taking advantages of the nutrients and removing these nutrients. So quantifying this would also imply a lot of deployment here in the Bantry Bay of in Ireland, and it has also involved some modeling. I will not detail here because it will be too long. I will just focus on some physical parameters we have also measured in terms of hydrodynamic, sedimentary processes, and turbidity. And I will insist on turbidity because this is one of very interesting results with GET, with the study, is that when we were measuring the light which is penetrating in seawater and reaching the bottom, we have seen, of course, that we could have a decrease in the irradiance at the bottom of the sea, but we have lower irradiance in control zones versus below the farm. So on the farm, we measure an increased light, and that was a surprise. It seems that the farm is enhancing water clarity, and that it could be beneficial with a seagrass bed, which was below this cultivation. So when we collected also the results in terms of local biodiversity, we have done that using traditional methods. I will not provide too much details, but cultivated seaweeds really provided a lot of diversity and new habitats for a lot of different animals, including fish and bivalves, and of course feeding opportunities. And they seems to behave, in fact, like artificial reefs. And when we measure also the potential negative impact on the fauna, but also on the wild flora, here the seagrass bait, what we have seen that we measure higher biodiversity in the seagrass, which were below the farm, rather than in the control zone. So we, of course, address a lot of questions related to fish, using also classical methods, deploying, of course, scuba diving, but also GoPro monitoring, using different traps. I will not go into the detail. This type of observation were also deployed in a farm in the Netherlands, but where there were a lot of colonization also by introduced species, especially with Japanese knotweed. So just a few images of the diversity which is colonizing the structure. So of course mussels, sea anemones, and a lot of fishes which are, especially the rock grass, which are present here. Other images, you see that really it's a jungle on the structure, on below the structures. So we also monitored the foraging opportunities for birds by counting the frequency of bird on this, and also the type of birds which were, in fact, coming to feed above the farm. And we have seen that in terms of frequency of presence of birds, we monitor it a lot. We have seen also that the cultivation of the sugar kelp was providing habitats for fishes, and especially for the juveniles of the lump suckers, which were recorded in very numerous in the cultivation sites, and some of them were used by the local salmon farmers because they are used to prevent sea lice invasion in salmon farming. So they are providing habitats, and that was monitored by, of course, a lot of photography, which is interesting for you to see, especially because, of course, when the kelp are growing, before harvesting, they could be colonized by a lot of invertebrates, and that, of course, is sometimes a negative impact for the cultivation, not for the environment. And again, the frequency of juveniles of pollocks or other fishes which are seen. Yeah. So seabed habitats were monitored a lot. So as I already mentioned, we have really seen a very positive impact. The Bantic also survey was done by classical method. I will just pass that because it would be too long to detail. And the conclusion are that we have not so much a negative impact, which were measured during our studies, except the huge presence of invasive in the Netherlands. We of course focus on the positive effects and the related ecosystem services they are provided. So in general, we also address the question of genetic pollution, which could occur when you are developing the selection of some specific genotype for cultivation, and that was based on a large population genetic studies, which provided the tools to monitor that. And what we have shown, in fact, at the scale we are operating at the moment, there is no gene flow between the cultivation and the natural population. We monitor it in Ireland, Norway, and Scotland and France. So I will just conclude by showing this nice, of course, seagrass bed with fishes. These sites have provided a lot of encouraging insights in terms of biodiversity. We are continuing, as it was mentioned by Olavour, a part of this work with the work package dedicated to ecosystem services in CMARC. And we will, of course, continue to address some questions related to biodiversity, but also address some questions related to carbon fluxes and how the culture are contributing. And in terms of biodiversity, we will focus also on a site which is part of the CMARC project, which is the site of Algolesco in southern Brittany, in Lesconil, and a new site which will be operated at 30 kilometers from there at Moëlan-sur-Mer, which will be a new site of 200 hectares. We will take benefits of these two sites, one which is operating for now more than 7 years, and another one which is will be a new site to deploy, of course, a part of the tools which were developed during the Genial project, but also new tools. And these new tools will be introduced by Caroline, by Samantha, sorry, in our talk. So I have no detail to give about the eDNA methodology, but it will be used in the project we will develop thanks to Adrien Vincent. Of course, Vincent has already talked about all the SDG which could be reached by developing seaweed cultivation. And of course, a large part of this SDG for SDG 14 is linked to the increase of biodiversity provided by seaweed cultivation. So thank you for your attention.
Our second speaker was supposed to be the expert in eDNA, namely Kat Bruce from Nature Metrics, and sadly she got COVID and was not able to come with us today. So we wish her a prompt recovery, and we'll try to publicize eDNA and the benefits of this new technology thanks to Samantha, who is our next speaker. You have already seen her. She's the managing director of the Kelp Foundation and also a strong advocate for seaweed, a scientific approach to seaweed development. So Samantha, the floor is yours.
So I've already introduced myself, Managing Director of the Kelp Foundation. The Kelp Forest Foundation is young. It was set up 2 years ago by Kelp Blue. And it was set up because we were finding these big gaps in the science around giant kelp cultivation. We wanted to really understand its role in being a nature-based solution. But we also wanted to understand how it compared to the wild kelp forests. So we set up the foundation to really target and focus on filling the gaps in the science. But of course, we can't do that alone. So we are working with over 20 different scientists and research institutions, people who have already started projects that we can build on or compare or help them to further. So we all know we have been listening a lot about the ecosystem services. These are the benefits that nature gives to us for free. And we wanted to really focus our research on quantifying and really understanding what giant kelp cultivation can do for us. So we are doing quite a lot of research around carbon sequestration, but I'm not going to be talking about that today. Kirsten talked about the research we're doing on the effects of biostimulants, not only on the plant, but also on biodiversity in the soil. But today I really wanted to address biodiversity. What is the role of these giant kelp forests, both wild and cultivated? For that, we are looking to first understand what wild cultivated kelp forests do, what the most pristine cultivated wild kelp forests do as a role as an ecosystem engineer, that provision of food and shelter to hundreds of species. So we've started with a project in the Falklands, which are these islands off the coast of Argentina, using environmental DNA. For those who don't know what environmental DNA is, basically picking up the DNA that is left by different organisms on water, for example. It can also be done on soil or air. So with Narissa Bax from SARI, we are doing the first ever eDNA study on the giant kelp forest, the most pristine, or one of the most pristine giant kelp forests in the world. It should be filled now.
So the Falklands is a really unique location in the world. So we are kind of at this mixing point between ecosystems, between the subantarctic and the southwest Atlantic. And so it's a kind of like a test case, especially in terms of the kelp forests that are considered intact. You know, we've got all these issues in our world like climate change and warming, and as a consequence over the last decade we've lost a lot of our kelp forests, and so now you have what are more like remnant kelp forests. What this means is that you get a very different type of research in these environments, and it's about restoration. Whereas in the Falklands, because we still have this wonderful situation where there's so much here, what we're really trying to do is understand what a good kelp forest looks like and how biodiverse and unique they are in the world. What we do is take a water sample directly within the kelp forest and send it away to Naturemetrics, where they will sequence within that sample and tell us what is there. And you get things like skin cells of certain animals that exist there, algal cells and zooplankton and all of those sorts of species. So it's kind of like getting an understanding of the invisible components of our ecosystem. So kelp forests, especially in locations like the Falkland Islands, they provide a number of what we term ecosystem services. And there's also a very important aspect of what we term blue carbon, and so that's where our habitats in the marine world take carbon from our climate change emissions and store it in sediments for hundreds to thousands of years. And this is a service that nature is providing to our planet for free and keeping us alive as a consequence.
So thank you, Ollie Dempster and Larissa Bax for this beautiful video. But this is the pilot study. We have a more ambitious study when we get the funding to do this on a global basis, to really look at all the giant kelp forests in the world, starting from Alaska all the way down to Chile and Argentina, South Africa, Australia, New Zealand, and use eDNA in combination with AI, with machine learning, to really create a metrics of health. So the pristine forest being on the one hand, and then the kelp forest destroyed by Brian's urchins probably on another one. And that will give us a framework of what we are going to be comparing ourselves in the giant kelp farming. So this is a sneak preview of what we want to do. So on the giant kelp farming, we are using the Namibian case, the kelp blue case, one of the first giant kelp forests, the only one really in Africa. Here is a photo of the canopy that has been developing quite strongly since September. But to really understand what the farmed giant kelp forest does to an environment, we've got to understand, and we have the choice, because with wild kelp forests you don't have this choice, to first do a baseline study of what there is in that ecosystem. Once you understand the baseline, as the kelp grows, you could really understand what changes are really happening. But the baseline is a very, very strong basis of comparison. So this is what we're doing. Oh, I'm not very, very lucky with a video today. So the eDNA allows us to have a very broad footprint of the ecosystem. But the eDNA only gives you presence, absence, or relative abundance. You really need to use other more traditional methods to really understand or to give you more robust data of what there really is in that ecosystem. So we use a lot of the traditional methods of visuals, etc. One of the most favorite one that I have is the acoustics, where we started to listen to dolphins coming into the kelp forests. And at the beginning, they were only hanging around really from about 5 o'clock to 2, and really chatting loudly for a couple of hours between 9 and 10, a bit of a coffee morning there. But since the kelp forest has become, and you have a canopy, they have actually become coming earlier to the kelp forest. So maybe that's to do with more fish, or maybe because they really love it. Once we have the data, we then try to analyze it and to understand how it fits in the food web, in the trophic level. How is the balance? Is there a good balance between herbivores and carnivores, for example? So to really understand what that health of that ecosystem is. We also have identified the sort of key species that we should be looking at. Are they like the commercially important species, like hake, for example? Are they really increasing? Then the fishermen in that area will be obviously very, very happy. What is happening to the jellyfish? Jellyfish is a bit of a litmus test of a bit of a sick ecosystem. If there are too many, it means that maybe the pelagic fish have been overfished. So with that, we really keep an eye on these important species. So, because I'm also have to finish this session, it is imperative for us to understand that these giant kelp forests are really important for us, for nature, for climate, and for biodiversity. So we need to protect them, because if they disappear, these ecosystem services also disappear. So we need to protect and restore kelp forests because they have a big role in climate and biodiversity. But we have to keep on investing in research to monitor the changes, to understand and to be able to direct the course if we start seeing things that shouldn't be happening in the wild, but also in the cultivated. So eDNA, for example, allow us to keep an eye on, are these kelp forests degrading? And therefore you can start anticipating that and start to send urchinomics, for example, to pick up the urchins should be. So if there are any philanthropic funders that are interested in supporting this type of research, if there are research institutions who are looking to collaborate in more research into giant kelp, cultivated and wild, and if there are tech companies, I think you play a very big role in the monitoring and the transparent and independent research that needs to be done for this very important natural ecosystem. Thank you very much.
We'll now have a brief panel discussion with our two great speakers. Thank you very much, both of you. The first question I wanted to discuss with you is, we've heard this morning about the need to scale up the production of seaweed. We have this climate urgency, we have this biodiversity crisis urgency, and so we need to scale up seaweed production and seaweed restoration. But how do we do that in a way that is compatible with a science-based approach and prevents us from replicating the mistakes we've done on land when we decided to scale up agriculture and industrial farming?
Definitely research and monitoring, and when you start with pilot cases, you really can go deep into different effects. Of course, as you get bigger, you also have to keep on monitoring these. You also need to have the tools to be able to do that.
Yeah, I would say that an important point will be to consider that we will not succeed for that without cooperation. And we have to start by the local people, and especially the local communities and the local stakeholders, including, of course, the farmers which are capable of developing the farms. It's not only a matter of science. We are nothing if we are not operating with entrepreneurs which have the possibility to scale up the seaweed sector. So this is what we have tried to do during the last 12, 13 years, thanks to, of course, very interesting grants which were allowing us to fund research, good research, but in condition with the link with the industry. And we work together really to construct some experimental designs and also some tools which could be really important to monitor the scales. We also work very interdisciplinary. We could not address this question only by involving biologists and geneticists or ecologists. We have also to involve the social sciences, the economists, and all science which are required really to provide an holistic vision of the potential of development in the sector. So it's not only a matter of monitoring the biodiversity, it's also to understand how the biodiversity is perceived by the local citizens, what are they telling about that, because sometimes even for small scale operation we are facing a lot of opposition. So when you are telling about large scale cultivation, that's immediately you have people like which are considering that we will develop industrial agriculture at sea.
And thank you, Philippe. This is a perfect segue to my second question on this element of social license. Again, if we want to continue to scale up the production of seaweed and the cultivation of seaweed in many of our coastal areas, You know, people might like the hype of seaweed when it's on the TV or when they are reading Vincent Dumézil's book, but at the same time they say not in my backyard. And so we have to deal with other ocean users, with coastal residents who might not be aware yet of all the benefits of seaweed. So my question to you is, with all this data you are analyzing, producing, all these benefits of seaweed you are identifying, how can we better leverage all these elements to increase the social license to operate and to onboard all these other stakeholders so they become supporters and not anymore bottlenecks to the scale-up of the industry? Do you want to go first, Samantha? Yeah.
I'll go for it. One easy solution is obviously going offshore. If you go far away from the coast, nobody sees, and usually you can find a space where there's plenty of space offshore. So that's what, for example, Kelp Blue is trying to do. The other one is awareness and education. And I think if we start, and we do quite a lot of that within the Kelp Forest Foundation, starting off in Namibia, a lot of ocean education with children who will then become the adults that will understand that these seaweeds are amazing and that they have a role to play in climate, biodiversity, and replacing a lot of the nasty products that we keep on putting on our soils, for example. So I think it is, in my point of view, two of the most important things are education and awareness of the role of seaweed.
Thank you.
I think also it's not as most of the development of the current seaweed industry are done in coastal zone. We have to consider that, in fact, of course, during the development, we may face some opponents, and these opponents are really considering that new operations in their areas could be a problem. But we have also to consider that the seaweed industry will develop in different regions in the world, and in some regions, like in Africa, the perception of the citizens will not be the same as it could be done it could be in the United States or Canada or Europe. And also if you are considering, for example, the development of tropical seaweeds industry, it's also a different perception. So sometimes these operations were developed in areas which were already very degraded by overfishing, by the local community were facing major problems, and sometimes they were really accepted as an opportunity. And if we, at the moment with the Safe Seaweed Coalition, we are supporting projects in Madagascar, and clearly the operators, the entrepreneurs which are developing the collaboration with the local communities are considering that the development of the seaweed cultivation is an opportunity for these people, and these people are considering that they will, of course, gain some revenue, and they have not the same, of course, concern about the fact that they could modify the ecosystems, even if they are, of course, modifying and providing some artificialization. But they consider also that, if you work with the people, they will not say that the perception for them of the biodiversity is similar to a European citizen.
No, thank you very much. And Caroline, do we have time for the last question of the panel before we go for the Q&A? Okay, so the last question, and I think that if I remember well, the topic was touched upon by some of our speakers previously, is about how can we somehow monetize all these ecosystem services and biodiversity benefits of seaweed farming. So we've heard for years, if not decades, about carbon credits. What is, in your opinion, the future of biodiversity credits that seaweed farms could apply for? Who wants to go first?
Biodiversity credits are very nice to have, and I'm sure it would be very nice for restoration, for conservation, for kelp farmers as well. It's difficult it's difficult because you have to create a framework that really shows that you are actually, your activity is really doing that biodiversity change, and it's not just a change that is happening. So I think it would be a great thing to have. I think I see it a little bit difficult in the short term. Maybe technology might help us in this, in terms of monitoring and valuing and quantifying, but I don't see it coming too soon.
No, I'm not sure that we will succeed in defining biodiversity credits, and unless they will be associated with carbon credits or other credits, which could be. There were some efforts also to provide some importance to nutrient removal also, and that of course could help, but it is difficult to develop, and so I consider that the development of integrated aquaculture could help for really providing much more license to the operation of seaweeds, and especially if we can combine shellfish on seaweeds in some regions or other invertebrates, that will be from holotrophic level. That will provide very good examples and support from, of course, industry, but also from government, which will see that by a better integration of different aquacultures, they could really mitigate the impact of the negative impact of developing this activity, which should, like was shown with archenomics, provide also some provisional services, which could provide additional money to support the development, which could be less profitable in terms of improving biodiversity and so on. So that's probably the model which could be adapted in different local context, because the local context will be very important for that.
Thank you both. So, inspirational concept, but not yet to be seen being working.
I think there is a concept being developed. I think Plan Vivo is trying to develop a biodiversity credit, but I don't.
So maybe in a year from now we'll be talking about that with something more tangible. I will now open the floor to questions from the audience, if you have any. Okay, there is one over there.
Thank you. I heard that there's maybe more than 12,000 different seaweed and algae species and all that. Under this complexity, is there a way that we could maybe classify this? Like maybe with plants, we have quite well-organized, systematic way, and we can differentiate well between invasive and non-invasive plants. In fact, in the European Union, we have a list of, a red list of what is an invasive plant and how should we consider the potential economical uses of that. Do we have something parallel for the ocean? Is there a list of algae that are more risky than others, or how is the thing?
There is a list of algae which are providing a lot of concern at the moment. Of course, on the top of the list is the edible seaweed Undaria pinnatifida, the wakame from Japan, which is now on the red list everywhere in the world because it was introduced by ship traffics, but also in Europe by the development of wakame aquaculture in France first, and then it has escaped from cultivation and it spread all over Europe. It was also introduced in Spain. And we have every year new species, like at the moment in the Mediterranean Sea, there is a big concern with Regulopteris, a brown alga, which will be on the list, of course, on the red list of invasive species, because it's spreading so fast at the moment and providing so much negative impact on fisheries, on also tourism by when there are beach castings and so on. So that clearly we have this list could be enlarged, and this is why, and we were discussing that yesterday with Samantha. There is a lot of precautions which are provided by scientists worldwide at the moment about the development of seaweed aquaculture, how it should be operated. Should we allow for the continuation of transfer of different species between different oceans? Should we also preserve the local genetic diversity and avoid the introduction of new genes in a given environment? So there is a lot of debate at the moment, even if we are in a rush. So that's a big a question we should discuss further later on. Yeah.
Thank you, Philippe. And we will take one last question from Daniel.
Thank you. So Sammy, one for you. We've been doing amazing work together, and what I think makes us both most proud is seeing these sort of young Namibians supervised by some of the best professors at some of the best universities in the world, not only raising their aspirations towards a much more global stage, but also tying in that research so that knowledge around seaweed and giant kelp specifically starts to be more widely shared. So as we move forward, you know, with the intent to keep doing this research for decades, I think we will, in the long term, have contributed to maybe one of the most deep and extraordinary sets of sort of holistic research on an ecosystem that the planet's ever had. But if we come a bit closer, for you personally, on these two pillars of carbon biodiversity, what are the sort of big champagne milestones that you're working towards that would lead you to say, you know, sort of job done for now?
On the carbon side, the work that we're doing on trying to find the fingerprints of giant kelp, trying to develop those markers, those biomarkers that will actually unequivocally identify giant kelp in sediments, for example. That is, I think, a very, very important development because it does benefit everybody on the wild or the cultivated side to be able to then eventually be able to say, look, this is giant kelp carbon in the sediment. So on the carbon side, I think that is and we're doing that through working with different universities, like, for example, Cawthorne Institute in New Zealand, wanting to develop qPCR, ddPCR, Utrecht University, etc. On the biodiversity side, I think the way that the young students have taken on the role of really taking on a cutting-edge technique like environmental DNA and really making it their own, really becoming the eDNA experts in that part of Africa. Then they go and do conferences in South Africa and in other countries there to explain how eDNA is helping as one of the monitoring techniques. And I think that, yeah, I love the combination of capacity building with these new technologies that are helping us to quantify these changes and to be able to track these changes.
Thank you very much, both. I think that that makes the opportunity to wrap up this panel. Thank you very much for your interventions. Please give a warm round of applause to our speakers.
And this brings us to the closing of our session. And I'd like to give the floor back to Tim, but I'd just like to say a couple of thank yous. Isabelle, Pierre, Alexandra, Olivier, Adrian, and Julian in the back tech, thank you very much. And thank you very much for allowing us to be here and hosting us. And I'm going to give final words to Tim Flannery.
Well, what a truly extraordinary session. For me, at least personally, it has lived up to the expectations that I had of us all working together and just hearing about the most extraordinary results. I suppose in summary, I'd say that what we've created today is an atmosphere of hope. It's not an atmosphere of solution yet, but it's an atmosphere of hope. We can see where we need to go and what the pathways forward are. And a big thing that I've learnt today is just about bravery. The bravery of some of the people who are at the cutting edge of this industry is quite extraordinary. Oliver, I can't believe that you work in currents that move at 1.5 meters per second. I mean, my God, that is way out there. And the bravery that both you and Daniel share of devoting your life to this cutting edge industry where so much is uncertain is just so heartening to see, so fantastic to see for both of you. I think, my goodness, so much was new for me today. The idea that we may be able to enhance the growth rate of certain kelp by incorporating sea urchin shells in by as much as 370% sounds like magic, but clearly it's real. Even if there's a small increment elsewhere on growth rates, it's fascinating. But what is really interesting to me, it highlights how young this industry is, how little we know, how much we've got to learn, where we can get quantum leaps forward. Perhaps that's just one early indication. And of course the plastics, I had no idea that people were doing so much with the development of substitutes for plastics. That was, to me, again, an absolute eye-opener. And I guess just harking back to the earlier sessions, what I can see is that once this industry becomes fully scaled, so we can actually replace those petrochemicals reliably and at the scale required, we have opened a magic toolbox that will allow us to do so much in terms of creating a much more sustainable planet. I'd just like to reflect on a couple of things in closing as well. One is that what has become very clear, we are not operating in a vacuum. We are operating in a world that is rapidly destabilising from a climate perspective, from a food security perspective, from a water security perspective. And when you put that lens on, we can see the dangers. We can see there are some dangers in terms of going forward. Biodiversity may change in farmed kelp farms. There may be many other aspects of this enterprise which we need to keep our eyes open to, and we need to monitor and learn more about. But because we are working in such a dangerous situation, I don't think we can let concerns about potential problems put us off what is a grand experiment. In fact, these early phases of kelp production that we've seen today, I think we need to continue and accelerate them with an eye on those dangers, but to make sure that overall the balance is positive, that we're actually improving our situation. We're racing against tipping points in the climate system. As I said, we're racing against food shortages, degradation of our soil, and of course we're racing against a rapidly developing market. Just as I was listening about biodiversity credits just a few moments ago, I was reflecting on the nature of the voluntary carbon markets and carbon plus markets, which include biodiversity. I mean, we've seen just over the last few weeks spectacular collapses, particularly of investments into rainforests, where people thought we had a proper methodology and a proper agreement with people to protect rainforest in return for carbon and biodiversity credits, particularly in my part of the world, in Melanesia, just north of Australia. What that tells me is that the markets are not waiting for anybody. They're out there, there is a thirst, there's a hunger for carbon credits, for biodiversity credits. We need to be able to fill them credibly. If we lose our credibility because the markets are racing to make these investments and they're made on a very unstable basis or a not well thought through basis, we will lose the credibility of the markets, and we can't afford to do that. So the urgency of this research in biodiversity and in carbon sequestration needs to be doubled. We need to be prepared for those developing markets so that we can make sure that we keep good faith with the investors who want to invest in that sector. I'd just like to leave you all with perhaps a slightly different way of thinking about this problem in the world, because sometimes if we have another lens that we can look through, another little keyhole that we can look at this big problem through, it helps us comprehend where we are. I've always been interested in the Gaia concept, the concept that this planet of ours is a single living entity, or at least behaves like a single living entity. And it certainly does. It self-regulates its temperature and its chemistry in ways that keep the planet suitable for life. But we are entering a very precious moment in the Gaia and Earth system, because as we assemble a sort of a global mind, really, and we are seeing that just perhaps in my generation, this global mind beginning to assemble. We are seeing the beginnings of a way of Gaia knowing itself and acting on that knowledge in a way that's very much akin to the way our own bodies work. You know, when we are born into the world as infants, we can't thermoregulate properly. We can't feed ourselves. Our muscles aren't coordinated to allow us to walk or do anything else but a few of the most simple requirements of living. And in a way, I think our global civilization is at that point now. We are not fully capable yet of being the mind over the world and acting on that knowledge. We can apprehend the dangers, we can see them, but we need to mature and develop as a society as we respond to that challenge. You know, the most perilous moment in the life of any organism is the moment of birth. Absolutely, that's when the highest mortality is. It's when the dangers are greatest. And I think we as a global civilization are at that very perilous moment. There are forces within the old way of doing things, which include the kind of current warfares we're seeing in this part of the world we thought we'd finished with, but they are still there. We're seeing all of the dangers of the trajectory of our growth to this point, including the climate crisis and everything else. And we are only barely now beginning to rise to the challenge of dealing with those problems. This industry, this seaweed industry, is a vital part of rising to that challenge. It's a large new tool that we can have, if used properly, to literally secure our future in the longer term. The oceans are 500 times larger than the atmosphere. They are the juggernaut of the climate system. They're the anchor point for our global biodiversity and climate system. We need them as part of the solution. And I just want to compliment everyone who's here today for playing that very pioneering role in what will be a very long journey towards sustainability and towards us being the true mind over the land. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. This concludes our Seaweed Day, and hope to see you next year for a 4th year running. Thank you.